Hi everyone, I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you today. I know you watched this video to fall asleep, so before you do that, like it, subscribe to the channel, and then settle in and relax. The scratching sound came from right above my bed, and at first I thought it was just the house settling or perhaps a squirrel on the roof, but as I lay there in the dark with my eyes wide open, I realized it was too rhythmic and intentional to be anything other than human. I had been hearing odd sounds in my attic for weeks now, little thuds and creaks, that I wrote off as the typical noises made by an old house, but tonight was different. My heart was racing as I slowly sat up in bed, being careful not to make any noise. The scratching was steady and persistent, and I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers shaking, and I dialed 911. The scratching stopped suddenly as soon as I pressed the call button, and I held my breath, keeping the phone to my ear while I waited for the operator to answer. The silence in the house was deafening, and then I heard a voice on the other end of the line. There was a loud thud from the attic, followed by swift, heavy footsteps. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered urgently into the phone, there's someone in my attic, please hurry. I gave them my address and hung up, my whole body trembling. The footsteps above had stopped, but I could still hear faint rustling sounds, so I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor. I needed to leave the house, but directly below were the stairs to the first floor. I snuck to my closet and took the baseball bat I kept there for protection, because if I tried to leave, I would be right in the intruder's path. My palms were sweaty as I gripped it tightly, and I kept my eyes on the ceiling while the minutes passed painfully slowly. Where were the police? I strained my ears to hear sirens, but all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the occasional creak from above. Then a new sound made my blood run cold. It came from the hallway outside my bedroom. When I realized the intruder was approaching, I pressed myself against the wall next to my bedroom door. The bat was raised and ready, and my heart was racing so hard that I was certain it would give me away. The hallway floorboards creaked under the weight of their cautious, slow footsteps, and they stopped just outside my door. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door started to open in the dim light from my window. I saw a shadow fall across the floor as when the figure entered the room, I swung the bat as hard as I could. The intruder stumbled backward, and I took advantage of the sickening thud and cry of pain to run past them. I ran down the stairs and out the front door into the cool night air. I ran to my neighbor's house and pounded on their door until the porch light flicked on. When they opened it, I finally heard the blessed sound of police sirens in the distance. The next hour was a blur of police statements and interrogation. They searched my house thoroughly, but found they said they would increase patrols in the area and advised me to stay with a friend for a few days. But I couldn't get rid of the feeling that they had overlooked something. The way the intruder had moved and appeared to know the layout of my house felt too familiar and practiced against my better judgment, so I chose to stay. I couldn't explain it, but I needed to know what was going on in my own house, so the following day I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed. I installed a security system with cameras at each entrance, but even with these safety measures, I was unable to unwind. Every sound made me jump, and I found myself continuously monitoring the attic access panel. A week went by without any problems, but my anxiety increased as I began to notice small items out of place, like a cup in the sink I didn't remember using or a book moved on the shelf. I knew I was probably being paranoid, but I couldn't help it and found myself spending hours in the spare bedroom. I was running my hands along the baseboards when I felt a slight give in the wall. My heart jumped as I pressed harder, and suddenly a small section of the wall swung inward behind it, revealing a narrow passageway that was dark and musty. I shone my flashlight inside and discovered a crude ladder leading up to the attic. My hands shook as I realized that there had been a hidden entrance to my attic this time. I should have called the police at that moment, but curiosity and a need for answers overcame my common sense, so I took a deep breath and began climbing the attic, which was larger than I had anticipated and ran the length of the house. As I got farther into the room, I noticed something that made my stomach turn, a makeshift living area in the far corner, concealed behind a stack of old trunks with a sleeping bag on the floor and a pile of boxes and old furniture visible. Empty food wrappers and water bottles, a small battery-operated lamp, and a stack of books were all on the wall behind this small camp. As I approached, my breath caught in my throat because I could see that there were dozens of photos of me sitting in my living room, working in the garden, and walking to my car. Some of the photos were obviously taken from outside the house, while others could only have been taken from inside. The realization hit me like a kick to the gut. When I turned to leave, my flashlight beam struck something that made me freeze. It was a small door built into the attic's knee wall, slightly jarred, and beyond it I could see a faint light. My instinct told me to run, but I found myself moving toward the door instead because I had to know, I had to see. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing at the creak of its hinges, and the space beyond was only a little bit larger than as she nearly caught me today on day 156 because I was careless and made too much noise, but it's okay. She's not ready yet, and soon she'll understand why I'm here. The closet's contents made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in writing, scribbled messages, and rambling paragraphs that made no sense. In the middle of the room was a small table, and on it sat a laptop, its screen glowing softly. As I stepped closer, my eyes were drawn to the open document on the screen. I've been observing her. She's the only person who can assist me in us. She just isn't aware of it yet. The words were hazy as tears welled up in my eyes. This stranger had been living in my home for more than 5 months, and they believed that I was theirs to help. I heard a noise behind me and my heart twisted in my throat. In the dim light, I could see a figure blocking the entrance to the small room with wild, disheveled hair and eyes that gleamed with an unnerving intensity. "You weren't supposed to find this yet," the stranger said in a hoarse voice, "but perhaps it's time for you to learn the truth." I retreated, my back against the table, and I heard the stranger say, "Who are you?" I smelled stale food and an unwashed body. "I'm here to save you and all of us, and you're the key. Don't you see your research? It's the answer we've been searching for." My mind raced when I was a data analyst for a small tech company. How could that be the case? I understand that you're scared and confused, but I'll explain why I had to do this and why I had to watch you learn everything about you. I looked around frantically for a way out, but the stranger blocked the only way out, so I was stuck. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I don't understand, just tell me what you want." The stranger's face softened and an eerie smile spread across its features. "I want you to complete your destiny." As they were speaking, I saw a small remote control on the table next to the laptop. Without thinking, I grabbed it and pointed it at the stranger, hoping to startle them. To my surprise, the stranger's eyes widened in fear, but instead they screamed, "Don't press that, you'll ruin everything." In my confusion, my finger slipped and I pressed one of the buttons, and then a high-pitched wail filled the air. It was the alarm for my new security system. The stranger howled in frustration and lunged at me, but I ducked under their arm and fled. I scurried through the attic, down the secret passage, and out into the hallway, hearing the stranger crash behind me, but I didn't turn around. I fled the house and into the street, the alarm still blaring as police sirens came up in the distance. I stood there, gasping for air, my peaceful life upended, my sense of security destroyed, and I was struck with the terrifying realization that sometimes the monsters aren't hiding in the closet or in the "I turned the key in the ignition." But all I got was a depressing clicking sound, and our car rolled to a stop on the narrow, winding road. Sometimes they're right above us, watching and waiting, and the headlights flickered on and off twice before dying completely, leaving us in the dark. Sarah muttered next to me, her voice tight with frustration, and I could hardly make out her silhouette in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees. I pulled out of the closet. The GPS had gone haywire about an hour ago, leading us down this desolate stretch of road that wasn't even on our map. I squinted through the windshield trying to pierce the darkness, and then I noticed a faint glow in the distance off to our right. I pointed out that there must be a house or something, and maybe they have a phone we can use, Sarah. My phone already knew I'd see no signal. We were miles from the closest town, surrounded by dense forest, and the GPS had gone haywire about an hour ago. What should we do now? She sighed and gave in, but let's be careful. We took our flashlights from the glove compartment and got out of the car. The night air was cool and damp, heavy with the smell of pine and wet earth, and our footsteps crunched on the gravel as we drove away. I understand her concern that it seems risky to walk up to a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere, but we didn't have many options. As we approached the light, I noticed the outline of a large farmhouse. It was old, with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but warm light spilled from the windows, promising shelter and help. We went to the front door, and before I could knock, the door opened, revealing a tall, thin man with graying hair and deep-set eyes. "Hello there," he said in a gruff but kind voice. "What brings you folks out here so late?" I explained our situation, and the man's face lit up sympathetically. I was immediately struck by how cluttered the place was. Every surface was covered in trinkets, old newspapers, and what appeared to be mechanical parts, and the air was thick with the smell of tobacco and something else. "Smile, car trouble, eh? That's a tough break. My name's Earl. Why don't you two come on in, and we'll see about getting you some help." Sarah squeezed my hand as a silent reminder to be cautious, but Earl's friendly demeanor and the warmth emanating from the house were too alluring to resist. Before we could object, Martha Earl called out, "Now we've got company." A short, plump woman with frizzy gray hair appeared from what I thought was the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron and gave us a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, my visitors at this hour. How exciting," she said, her voice high. "You poor dears must be exhausted. Why don't you have a seat in the living room while I fix you some tea? Where are you folks headed?" Earl sat down in a worn armchair across from us, and the walls were covered in old photos of their subjects staring at us blankly. I told them about our trip to see Sarah's parents, being careful not to give too many details, and as I spoke, I noticed Earl's eyes darting between us as if assessing us. Martha came in with a tray of tea and cookies, and as she put it down, I smelled that weird smell again, which reminded me of chemicals, like something you'd find in a garage. "I'm fairly handy with engines, so why don't I look at your car in the morning? It's too dark now, and these roads can be dangerous at night." Sarah and I looked at each other, and while the idea of staying here at night made me uneasy, the idea of walking back to our car in the dark seemed even less appealing. "That's very kind of you," Sarah said cautiously, "but we wouldn't want to impose. If we could just use your phone to call for a tow truck, that would be great, but our phone line has been down for days." As she was speaking, I noticed a dark stain on her apron. It looked fresh, and in the dim light it almost looked red. Earl must have noticed that I was staring because he quickly got up, blocking my view of Martha. "Well, it's settled, then. You'll stay the night, and we'll take care of your car in the morning. How about some dinner? Martha makes a mean stew." The mention of food made my stomach growl, reminding me that we hadn't eaten since the dining room was as disorganized as the rest of the house. Martha set out bowls of thick, dark stew that smelled surprisingly good as we ate, and Earl told us stories about the farm and the surroundings. Despite my uneasiness, I found myself nodding as we followed them to the dining room. I whispered to Sarah, "Something feels off about this place," and she nodded slightly. "I know, but what choice do we have? Let's just get through the night and leave first thing in the morning." I felt Sarah stiffen next to me. Earl's tone was informal, almost cheerful, but there was an undercurrent of something. A warning, a threat. Martha tittered nervously. "Oh, Earl, don't scare our guests with those old stories. I'm sure they're tired and would like to get away from it." He seemed to know every inch of the forest, describing hidden caves and forgotten trails with vivid detail, as you can see by the way his eyes glinted in the candlelight. Some rest, as if on cue, made me feel drowsy. My limbs felt heavy, and I had to struggle to keep my eyes open. I looked at Sarah and noticed that she was having trouble getting up, her head nodding forward slightly. Alarm bells began to ring in my head, but they seemed far away and muffled. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. "I think we should go to bed." I managed to slur out Earl's smile, which widened and revealed too many teeth. "Of course, Martha, why don't you show our guests to their room?" The trip up the stairs was a blur. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up with a start, my head pounding. The room was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back to the car. The farmhouse. Earl and Martha. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to check the time. 3:17 a.m. I remembered Martha's constant chatter as she led us to a small, musty bedroom with a single bed. As soon as she left, Sarah and I fell onto the mattress, too exhausted to do anything but give in to the encroaching darkness. Sarah was still asleep. Her breathing was deep next to me, and even then, I heard voices coming from somewhere below us. I strained to listen, catching snippets of conversation, and as the implications of what I was hearing set in, my blood ran cold. I shook Sarah awake, clamping a hand over her mouth to stop her startled cry, and I whispered urgently, "Something's very wrong here." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, and we crept to the door, wincing at the sound. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, I noticed light leaking from beneath a closed door in the basement. I realized we were almost to the front door when a floorboard let out a loud groan under my foot. The voices in the basement abruptly stopped. Did you hear Earl's voice? It was no longer friendly, but it was sharp with suspicion. Sarah and I didn't wait. We ran for the door, fumbling with the old floorboards. The hallway was dark and silent, but I could still hear the murmur of voices from downstairs. The basement door opened behind us, and then I heard footsteps moving quickly. We ran blindly down the overgrown driveway into the cool night air, and I could hear Earl shouting behind us. When we finally stopped gasping for air, we were back on the road where we had left our car. To our surprise, the car started on the first try, and we sped away, leaving the farmhouse and its sinister occupants far behind. I couldn't bring myself to look back. We drove in silence for a while, both of us processing what had happened, and then Sarah finally spoke to Jack. Her voice was shaky as she asked, "What do you think they were going to do to us?" I shook my head, not wanting to express the horrible possibilities that had been going through my head. "I don't know and I don't want to know," she said, and we pulled into a well-lit gas station. I silently vowed that no matter how long the detour or how inconvenient it was, we would never again turn to strangers for assistance on a dark, lonely road. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds chirping, no leaves rustling, just an eerie stillness that seemed to swallow every sound. I had been hiking for hours, my boots crunching over fallen leaves and twigs, but now even that seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath waiting. I checked my phone once more. When I realized I was lost, I should have turned around and retraced my steps to find the marked trail, but something kept pulling me forward, a combination of curiosity and stubbornness that I would soon regret, like a flicker of brightness as the light faded. The GPS had stopped working about an hour ago, leaving me with no signal and only a hazy sense that I was going in the right direction. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, painting the trees with long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. Hope rose in me through the trees. Perhaps it was a ranger station or a campsite. I accelerated my pace, pushing through the underbrush towards the light. But what I discovered instead stopped me cold. Nestled in a clearing were a number of dilapidated buildings, their windows gleaming with warm, inviting light, smoke curling from crooked chimneys, and I could hear the faint murmur of voices carried on the evening breeze. Relief washed over me. I had discovered a sort of civilization that could help me return to my car, or at least point a door creaked open, and a man emerged onto a porch, his weathered face set in a wary frown. An evening, I called out, trying to keep my voice friendly and non-threatening. "I apologize for being rude, but I've gotten a bit lost on the trails. I was hoping you could point me back to the main road." But the man didn't. I stepped into the clearing and waved to get someone's attention, but the reaction was immediate and unsettling. His dark, deep-set eyes looked me over from head to toe, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded rough, as if he wasn't used to talking. "There aren't any roads around here, stranger. This is Piney Grove, and we don't get many visitors." I felt cold, but it wasn't because of the cool evening air. Something about the way he said visitors made it sound like a dirty word. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trespass," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "If you could just give me directions to the nearest town, I'll be on my way." As if on cue, I heard a howl in the distance that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. So the man seemed to decide that you better come inside and we'll take care of you in the morning. Part of me wanted to refuse to turn and run back into the forest, but the sensible part of my brain knew that would be suicide. I was lost, it was getting dark, and I wasn't safe in these woods at nighttime. Reluctantly, I nodded and followed him to one of the larger buildings. As we went, I saw more people coming out of the other houses, watching me with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Their faces were pale and gaunt in the waning light, and children looked around their parents' legs with wide, unblinking eyes. The interior of the building was dimly lit by oil lamps, creating flickering shadows on walls covered in faded floral wallpaper, and the furniture appeared old, as if it had been handed down through the years. Ezekiel, the man, motioned for me to sit at a worn wooden table and said, "Here's my wife, Martha," a slender woman with long gray hair, nodding at me from near the fireplace. Her eyes never left mine as she stirred something in a large pot hanging over the flames. "I'm Lisa," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for your hospitality. You'll stay here tonight. In the morning we'll see," Ezekiel grunted. Martha ladled some stew into a chipped bowl and placed it in front of me. The smell made my stomach growl, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since that morning. I took a cautious bite and was surprised by the rich GY flavor. "What kind of meat is this?" I asked, more to break the awkward silence than out of genuine curiosity. "It's best not to ask questions you don't want answers to," Ezekiel replied. After dinner, Martha showed me to a small room upstairs. The bed was lumpy and the blankets smelled musty, but I was too tired to care. I lay down fully clothed and tried to sleep, but I must have dozed off because I woke up with a groan. His tone made it clear that the topic was closed. As I ate, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was really wrong here. The way Ezekiel and Martha watched me, the strange silence outside, the peculiar smell that seemed to permeate everything. All of it combined to create a sense of wrongness that made my skin crawl. For a brief moment, I became confused in the strange darkness and lost my way back to the hike. I was lost in Piney Grove when I heard a noise outside. The voices were low and urgent voices drifted up from below. I snuck to the window, being careful not to make any noise, and looked out into the moonlight. I saw a group of people gathered in the middle of the clearing, all wearing long robes, their faces obscured by hoods. In the middle of the circle stood Ezekiel, his arms raised as he spoke in I watched the strange ritual unfold with my heart pounding in my chest. What kind of place had I stumbled into? One of the robed figures looked up straight at my window, so I ducked down and prayed they hadn't seen me. I waited for what seemed like hours, barely breathing, before I dared to look again. The clearing was empty, so I couldn't sleep. After that, I lay in bed with every creak in the old house making me jump. And as soon as the first rays of dawn peeked through the window, I decided I had to leave. The house was silent as I crept down the stairs, my heart in my throat, and I eased the door open, wincing at every squeak of the hinges. I had just reached the front door when I heard a voice behind me, and I turned slowly to see Ezekiel standing at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes glittering in the dim light. I thought I'd get an early start, so I stammered and reached for the door handle. Ezekiel took a step towards me. It's not polite to leave without saying goodbye, especially after seeing things you shouldn't. I'm afraid that's not possible, you see. Piney Grove has ways of dealing with outsiders who discover our secrets. I didn't wait to hear more, so I yanked the door open and ran, my feet pounding on the dirt, towards the trees behind me. I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. I ran blindly through the forest branches, whipping at my face. Roots threatened to trip me with every step, and the strange howling cry I had heard the night before reverberated. I don't know how long I ran, but fear kept me going. The sounds of pursuit subsided, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was still pursuing me, something that didn't need to run to catch its prey. Just when I thought I couldn't go any farther, I exploded out of the trees onto a paved road, and a car was approaching. I waved my arms frantically, not caring how crazy I must look to the car. They hesitated for a second before nodding, and I clambered into the back seat as we drove away, half expecting to see robed figures. I screeched to a stop, and an elderly couple looked out at me in concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my wild appearance. I looked back at the forest, but there was no sign of a pursuit. but I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows between the trees. "Please," I gasped, "I need to get out of here. Can you give me a ride to the nearest town?" I never told anyone what had happened in Piney Grove, and sometimes late at night I still hear that weird howl in my dreams, and I wake up in a cold sweat, thankful for the familiar sounds of the city around me. But I know the truth. Deep in the forest where no roads lead, Piney Grove is waiting, and I pray that no other lost hiker ever discovers its secrets. The flickering fluorescent light gave the deserted lab a spooky glow at 2 in the morning. The lab had become a second home, with its familiar hum of equipment and faint chemical smell that was oddly comforting tonight. But that comfort vanished the moment I realized I wasn't alone. I had been working through the night for weeks, poring over data and running simulations for my thesis. So I knew my peaceful night of research was about to take an unsettling turn when I heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. Deliberately, I held my breath, and when the door opened, I saw a familiar face. However, I didn't anticipate Dr. Reeves, my thesis advisor's colleague, Sarah. His voice was unusually upbeat for the late hour, and I had to force a smile to conceal my discomfort. "Dr. Reeves, I didn't anticipate anyone else working so late." He entered the lab, shutting the door behind him. The gentle click of the latch felt strangely final, and he waved a hand dismissively. "Sometimes the best ideas come at night." I nodded and turned back to my computer screen, hoping he would take the hint and go. Instead, I felt him approach and peek over my shoulder at the data spread across my monitor. "What amazing work are you doing here?" he whispered, his breath uncomfortably warm on my neck, reminding me once more what the focus of your research is. I moved in my chair to put some distance between us. I explained that it's a new method of data encryption, using quantum entanglement to create unbreakable codes. I did this while maintaining a neutral voice. I said, minimizing the window on my screen, "There's still a lot of work to be done before it's anywhere near practical application." His eyes glowed with an intensity that made my skin crawl with unbreakable codes. "Now that's interesting, very interesting indeed," he said, and something in his tone raised alarm bells in my head. Dr. Reeves had always been courteous but distant in our previous interactions, so this sudden interest felt wrong, almost predatory. Naturally, my heart raced when I realized that he was implying what I believed him to be. I got up, needing to put more distance between us, but it was getting late, so I should probably go home. Dr. Reeves didn't move. His eyes, which were usually hidden behind thick glasses, seemed to bore into me before you left. "I'd love to take a closer look at your data. Perhaps I could offer some insights." I hesitated, but my instinct told me to leave. He was a reputable professor and the advisor's colleague. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think it would be appropriate given the state of research integrity and everything." His friendly demeanor briefly faltered, revealing something more serious underneath. "Come on, Sarah, we're all colleagues here, sharing knowledge. Isn't that what academia is all about?" I took a step back, bumping into the lab bench behind me. "Of course, but this is my thesis work, and I'm not comfortable sharing the raw data until it's been properly vetted and published." Dr. Ree's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand, but you know that a young researcher like you could use more academic and financial support." The implications hung between us, and my mouth dropped when I realized that Dr. Reeves wasn't just being nosy or going too far. He was attempting to steal my research. "I'm doing fine, thank you," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. And now, if you'll excuse me, I truly need to go. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. I looked at the emergency exit, but it would sound an alarm if I opened it. My phone was in my bag on the other side of Dr. Reeves. I don't think you understand the opportunity I'm giving you, Sarah. Your work could be revolutionary, but without the right connections, it might never see the light of day. I have those connections so I can make sure your research gets the attention it deserves. To maintain my composure, I have everything under control, and I'm not interested in outside assistance. His expression hardened, saying, "Your advisor doesn't understand the potential of what you're working on, but there are people who do. People who would pay handsomely for a peek at your research." The pretense was gone, and he was now openly admitting that he wanted to sell my work to the highest bidder. I felt a wave of anger cut through my fear that it wouldn't happen, so I said firmly, "Now, please let me leave, Dr. Reeves. I'm afraid I can't do that until we reach an understanding." My heart was racing, and I was stuck between him and the lab bench with no obvious way out. However, as my hand touched the cool surface behind me, an idea came to me quickly. I grabbed a beaker of distilled water and threw it in his face, and he staggered back, spluttering and wiping at his eyes. I took advantage of the distraction to dart around him, snatching my bag as I ran for the door. "You'll regret this," he yelled behind me. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I stayed away from the lab, working from home, and jumped at every unexpected sound because I knew I had to do something. But the thought of confronting Dr. Reeves or reporting him filled me with dread. I was already in the hallway running as fast as I could, and I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys as I drove away. I saw Dr. Reeves emerge from the building in my rearview mirror, his face twisted with anger. My academic career, but after the initial shock subsided, anger started to take the place of fear. This was my research, my hard work, and I wasn't going to let anyone steal it or coerce me into giving it up. So I scheduled a meeting with my advisor, Dr. Chun. As I sat in her office, sweating and my heart pounding, I told her everything that had happened that night in the lab, and to my great relief, she believed me more than that. She was furious on my behalf, saying, "This is completely unacceptable." It turned out that I wasn't the only victim of this. Other students and researchers came forward with similar stories of pressure and attempted theft. The scandal rocked the department, leading to Dr. Reeves' dismissal and a complete overhaul of research security protocols. I brought this to the dean right away. What followed was a flurry of meetings, investigations, and awkward confrontations. At first, Dr. Reeves denied everything, but after being presented with the evidence, including security camera footage from the previous evening, he eventually confessed. I returned to my work with a renewed sense of resolve. The experience had shaken me, but it also made me realize how valuable what I was doing was. If people were willing to go to such lengths to steal it, then it must be worth pursuing and protecting. Months later, as I stood at the podium to present my finished thesis, I felt a sense of triumph that went beyond academic achievement. I had faced a threat to my work and my integrity, and I had come out stronger for it. The applause that followed my presentation was lovely, but the true victory was in as I left the auditorium. Dr. Chun caught up with me, a proud smile on her face, and said, "Beautiful work, Sarah. We've received some interesting inquiries about potential applications for your encryption method completely above board. Of course, I smiled, feeling both excited and vindicated. I can't wait to see where this research goes next. However, as we walked out into the bright sunlight, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Hope for the future, even though the road ahead may not always be simple or easy. I knew that I had the strength to overcome any obstacles that came my way. The Dr. Reeves incident had taught me a valuable lesson in the field of cutting-edge research. Knowledge is truly power, and sometimes safeguarding that knowledge is just as important as finding it in the first place. The rain was falling in sheets, turning the highway into a blurry mess of headlights and reflections, and I squinted through the windshield, my wipers working overtime. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers because it's not the safest thing to do these days, but something about the way he stood there, shoulders hunched against the rain, made me slow down before I could talk myself out of it. I was pulling over to the shoulder, the car's tires splashing through puddles, and the man jogged over, his face hidden beneath the hood of a dark jacket. But hardly making a dent in the downpour, that's when I spotted him. A lone figure on the side of the road, thumb out, looking as wet and miserable as a stray cat caught in a storm. I nodded, trying to get rid of the nagging feeling that I might be making a mistake. "Where are you headed? Just down the roadways?" he replied vaguely, settling into the seat. "Wherever you're going is fine." As I pulled back onto the highway, I stole a glance at my new passenger, who was older than I'd initially thought maybe. I opened the passenger door, letting in a gust of wind and rain, and caught a glimpse of a scruffy beard and grateful eyes. "Thank you," he said, in a voice that was gruff but not unfriendly. I was just beginning to relax when he spoke again. "So Mark, how long have you lived in Cedar Grove?" I felt my body tense, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, and I hadn't told him my name or mentioned anything about myself. He was in his 50s, with deep lines etched into his weathered face. His clothes were clean but worn, and he didn't give off the unsettling vibe I'd expect from someone dangerous. "How did you know that?" I asked. I tried to speak steadily, but he laughed softly, sending a shiver down my spine. "Oh, I know a lot about you, Mark. I know that you work at the bank on Main Street, that you have a golden retriever named Max, and that your wife Sarah is probably wondering why you're running late tonight." My mind raced. How could he possibly know all of this? I had never seen this man before. Cedar Grove was a small town, sure, but not so small that everyone knew each other. His eyes seemed to gleam with an unnatural intensity in the dim light from the dashboard, but I make it my business to learn about people. It's amazing what you can learn if you just pay attention. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to slam on the brakes and order him out of the car, but we were in the middle of nowhere. The rain was still coming down in torrents, and something told me this man wouldn't go quietly if I asked him what I wanted, and he smiled in a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. I said, "I don't want anything, Mark. I'm just making conversation." Isn't that what people do on long car rides? My mind was racing with possibilities. Was he a stalker or criminal who had been watching me and plotting some sort of complex scheme? "You're wondering how I know so much about you?" he said, as if reading my mind, "and it's easier than you might think. As for Sarah, well, you've been checking your phone at every red light, so it doesn't take a genius to figure out that you're running late and someone is waiting for you." His explanation was reasonable, but it didn't allay my fears. There was still something strange about the whole situation that made my skin crawl. "That doesn't explain how you knew where I live," I said, trying to keep my eyes on the screen. "The dog hair on your pants suggests a large breed, and I noticed the golden retriever bumper sticker on your car. the road while also keeping an eye on him in my peripheral vision. He shrugged and said, "Cedar Grove Bank isn't exactly a national chain." I wanted to think that this was all a strange coincidence or a string of lucky guesses, but the knot in my stomach told me that wasn't the case. "Look," I said, spotting a gas station up ahead, "I think this is far enough. I'm going to pull over, and you can, and you can." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mark." He abruptly interrupted, "We're not done yet." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, Mark, you gave up that control the moment you let me in, but don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk about what I asked, my mouth dry about choices," he said, leaning back in his seat, "about the decisions we make and the consequences that follow. For example, your decision to embezzle small amounts of money from the bank. This is my car, I get to decide when the ride is over." "I don't know what you're talking about," but I lied, and my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. He turned to face me, his eyes boring into mine. "Don't insult my intelligence, Mark. We both know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Are you blackmailing me, or is this what he's doing?" I knew I shouldn't have asked, but he shook his head, looking almost disappointed. "Blackmail is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of this as an opportunity, a chance for you to make things right before it's too late. The bank is conducting an audit next week," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "They're going to find the discrepancies, and when they do, your comfortable life in Cedar Grove will come crashing down." He said, "Just go to your boss first thing tomorrow morning and confess everything and pay back what you took. It won't be easy, but it'll be a lot better than waiting for them to discover it on their own." I laughed bitterly. Why would I do that? He reached into his jacket pocket, and I tensed, half expecting him to draw a weapon. I shouldn't have interacted with this stranger who seemed to know far too much about my life and my mistakes, but I couldn't help myself. Instead, he produced a small leather-bound notebook because I have proof that he said, flipping it. He said, "Open dates, amounts, account numbers, everything they'll need to convict you. I'm giving you a chance to get ahead of this, Mark, a chance you don't deserve, but one I'm offering nonetheless." My mind reeled about how he had obtained this information, but I knew he was right because the audit would expose everything, and if I didn't act first, I would lose much more than just my job. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the weight of his words weighing on me like a heavy blanket as we approached the outskirts of Cedar Grove. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "Why do you care what happens to me?" He was silent for a long time, staring out at the rain-slicked road ahead. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost sad. "Let's just say I've been where you are, Mark. He made the same mistakes, thinking I could outsmart the system, and I learned the hard way that there's always a reckoning. I knew I had to make a decision because there was a diner up ahead. I said, I'll drop you off there at last." He nodded as if he was satisfied, and as I pulled into the diner's parking lot, he gathered his belongings and got ready to go back outside into the rain. He remembered Mark saying, "First thing tomorrow morning, it's your only chance," and before I could react, he vanished into the stormy night. I sat there for a while, the rain pattering on the roof. Finally, I took out my phone and dialed for the first time in months. I felt like I was moving in the right direction. The mysterious hitchhiker had given me another chance, and now it was up to me to make the most of it. When she answered my emotional voice, I said, "Hey, I'm on my way home, but I need to talk to you about something important when I get there." I hung up and put the car in drive, feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. The crack of a twig snapping startled me out of my peaceful reverie, and I froze my head. Hovering over the campfire, the dense forest that had seemed so inviting during the day now loomed ominously in the gathering dusk. I held my breath, straining to hear over the crackling of the fire, and there it was again, the distinct sound of footsteps too heavy and deliberate to be an animal. I had come to these woods alone, seeking solitude and a respite from the bustle of the city, and now, as fear crept up my spine, I realized how alone I really was. Slowly, I put down my marshmallow and reached for the flashlight next to me. The beam of light cut through the encroaching darkness, illuminating the dense undergrowth at the edge of my campsite. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure duck behind a large oak. I called out, hating how my voice trembled because no one answered, only the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. Maybe I was having hallucinations, maybe the solitude was making me jumpy, but then I saw it. When I saw a dark shape moving through the trees while staying in the shadows, my instincts told me to either fight or flee, and I decided to take flight. I quickly put out the fire and plunged the campsite into darkness while fumbling in the dim light of my flashlight. I grabbed my backpack and began packing in everything I could reach, including my map, water bottle, and bag of trail mix. As the sound of footsteps approached, I stopped trying to be stealthy. Whoever was out there knew I had seen them coming, so I dropped the rest of my equipment and headed into the woods, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I went. Branches whipped at my face and roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but fear drove me deeper into the unknown forest. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, I stopped gasping for air and leaned against a tree to try to orient myself in my panic. I had run aimlessly, not paying any attention to landmarks or direction, and the realization hit me like a punch to the eye. Fumbled in my backpack for my map and compass, but I must have forgotten them in the confusion of my hasty departure. My phone was useless out here with no signal and a rapidly dying battery, and I stifled a scream when a twig snapped nearby. They were still following me, and I took off again, not caring about the noise I made. My pursuer seemed to know exactly where I was. My legs hurt and my lungs burned, but terror kept me going until the ground vanished. The wind knocked me out for a moment as I tumbled down a steep embankment, leaving leaves and twigs scratching my skin as I rolled. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and having trouble breathing, and then I heard someone carefully descending the slope. Panic gave me strength, and I stumbled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my ankle, and limped forward until I found myself in a small clearing with trees opening up to reveal a sky full of stars. A branch cracked at the edge of the clearing, and I whirled around, straining to see. In the dim starlight, a figure stood there, just a silhouette against the darker backdrop of the forest. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice raw with fear and exhaustion. The figure took a step forward. "I want you to listen." A deep voice replied, and I backed away, keeping my hands out in front of me. It was beautiful, but my flashlight flickered, its beam growing weaker. I shook it desperately, but it was useless, and the light died, leaving me in near complete darkness. Possess a weapon. It was a pitiful blunder, but it was all I had the man for. I could now see that a man had stopped. "No, you don't." His tone was almost gentle, and he said, "You left everything behind at your campsite, including this." He held up my hunting knife, which glinted in the starlight, and I felt sick to my stomach. He had visited my campsite, gone through my belongings, and asked, "How long have you been watching me?" I tried to maintain my composure. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to sound steady. He took another step forward, and I could see more details now. I felt like the ground had fallen out from under me once more. He knew my name, but how could he possibly know it? "How do you know who you are?" He finished for me. "I know a lot about you, Alice. I know you're running from something or someone." My mind raced. Was he a private investigator? David had hired someone to do it? He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing that blended with the night. His face was hidden by a beard and the shadow of a cap. The man shook his head, seemingly reading my mind, and said, "I'm not working for your ex-husband if that's what you're thinking. I'm here to help you help me. I laughed, almost hysterically, as he chased me through the woods in the middle of the night on the first night in our new house. I woke up to the sound of children laughing, faint, almost dreamlike, but unmistakable. The problem is that my wife, Sarah, and I had just moved into the old Johnson farmhouse on the outskirts of town, and we didn't have any kids. It was a gorgeous spot with weathered wood and a wraparound porch situated on 10 acres of rolling hills and old oak trees. We had gotten it for a great price, and the real estate agent was practically ecstatic as she gave us the keys. She said, "It's a special place," with a smile that was a little too big. "I'm sure you'll be happy here." Now, as I lay in bed and listened to the phantom giggles reverberating through the hallways, I wasn't sure I jolted Sarah awake. "Did you hear me?" She blinked at me drowsily, and I did. Away, leaving only the creaks and groans of the old house to settle. I shook my head, thinking that I must have been dreaming, but I wasn't, and that was just the beginning. Over the course of the following weeks, strange things started to happen to us. The temperature would drop suddenly in some rooms, creating cold spots that made your breath fog even on the warmest days. And Sarah would always laugh, trying to explain that everything that moved was just us. A month or so after we moved in, I was in the attic unpacking some of the last boxes when I discovered the journal. It was old, the leather cover cracked and faded, tucked away behind a loose board in the wall. Curious, I opened it, and the handwriting inside was spidery and hard to read. The cold spots were drafts in an old house, and the laughter was probably just kids from a neighboring farm sound carrying far in the country quiet. I wanted to believe her. The diary belonged to Margaret Johnson, the matriarch of the family who had constructed this house more than a century ago, and what she wrote was horrifying. According to Margaret, the land on which the house was built was cursed, and the local Native American tribe had warned the Johnsons not to build here because it was a sacred place, a thin spot between worlds. However, Thomas Johnson was a stubborn man, and he disregarded their warnings, so at first everything appeared to be fine. But then the children began to change. They became reclusive, talking about games and imaginary friends that they played in empty rooms. Margaret wrote about toys moving on their own, about shadowy figures that appeared out of the corner of her eye, and about hearing laughter when no one was around. The last entry was made in 1920, and Margaret's handwriting was frantic and hardly readable. They were coming for her. She then wrote, "I can hear them laughing. God forgive us for what we've done." I closed the journal, my hands shaking. It must have been some sort of illness. Joke, right? A prop left by the previous owners to frighten new residents. But as I stood there, the attic felt colder, and I thought I heard a child giggle right behind me. I nearly fell down the attic stairs in my haste to get out, and I found Sarah in the kitchen humming while she made dinner. The scene was so normal after what I just read, Sarah, that I said, my voice shaking, "We need to talk about the house," telling her everything, including the journal, the curse, and the disappearing children. As I spoke, her face turned pale. She told me about the figures she'd seen in mirrors, always just at the edge of her vision. The way she occasionally felt watched even when she was alone in the house, and the dreams she'd been having of children calling out to her, begging for help. We sat there in stunned silence, the implications of what we discovered settling over us like a heavy blanket. I could see the doubt in her eyes, wearing as she tried to ignore Tom. She said, slowly, I think I've seen them." Before we could decide on a course of action, the exorcist put the house back on the market and hoped that another unwary couple would purchase it. The lights flickered, the kitchen's temperature dropped, and our breath became suddenly apparent. Then, we heard laughter coming from all directions, louder than ever before. At that moment, Sarah grabbed my hand, her nails digging into my skin, and she whispered to Tom, "We need to get out of here." We ran for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The knob turned, but it seemed as though something was huddled in the living room. We watched in horror as objects started to move on their own. Books flew off shelves, furniture slid across the floor, and all the while those voices kept calling to us. Sarah found the solution as a chair whizzed past her head, and she noticed something glinting on the back door, windows, and even the cellar entrance, all of which were locked and immovable. The laughter grew louder. We didn't wait to see if it was really over because the front door swung open easily now. The mantelpiece was an old arrowhead, probably Native American, that had been displayed as a curio by a previous owner. The journal she gasped said this was sacred land, so perhaps she didn't need to finish the thought. I lunged for the arrowhead, snatching it just as an invisible force tried to pull it away. The moment my fingers closed around it, everything stopped. The flying objects dropped to the floor, the laughter abruptly stopped, and the oppressive cold subsided. We hired a company to pack up our belongings and sell the farmhouse, making sure to include the arrowhead and Margaret's journal with the property. We also made them promise to disclose the house's history to any potential buyers. As of the last time I heard, the property is still for sale. The real estate agent describes it as a charming fixer-upper with a rich history. We ran to our car while still in our pajamas, and I held the arrowhead tightly as we drove through the night, not stopping until we were 2 states away. In any case, Sarah and I don't talk much about what happened in that house because it's easier to pretend it was all a shared delusion, a result of stress and an overactive imagination, but we both know the truth, and we both know that sometimes the most haunting things happen. We barely escaped it, and sometimes late at night I still wake up thinking I hear children laughing. However, now that we're in a city home with the comforting sounds of traffic and neighbors, I can convince myself it's just a dream most of the time. Not the ghosts themselves, but the questions they leave behind. Why us, why that house, and what happened to those kids all those years ago? Maybe better left unanswered. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some doors are better left unopened. All I know is that if you ever find an old farmhouse for sale in the country and it seems a little too perfect or too cheap, keep driving because you never know what might be laughing inside. I sighed as I looked at the clock on my dashboard at 11:47 p.m. The neon sign, which read, sputtering in and out of existence like a dying firefly, flickered weakly in the rain, throwing an ominous red glow over the empty parking lot of Mario's Pizza. Darkness was ready to welcome you home. I'd been driving for Mario's for about 6 months now, a job I took to help pay for college. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and it wasn't particularly exciting most of the time. Usually the pizza box lay on me as I pulled out of the lot. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something about this delivery felt off. The rain got worse as I drove, and I saw fat droplets splattering against the windshield faster than my wipers could clear them. The streets got narrower, the houses more dispersed, and soon I was traveling down a winding road with dense forest on either side. The address was way out on the edge of our delivery zone, and the passenger seat steam was still rising from the vents. After what seemed like an eternity, the trees opened up to reveal a dilapidated house with dark windows except for one light on the second floor. I parked and took the pizza box, which was already getting cold in the damp night air. As I moved toward the front door, the porch steps creaked menacingly beneath my feet. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door swung open and the man standing there forced me to take an involuntary step back. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a wild beard and eyes that seemed to stare right through me. He was wearing jeans that had seen better days, and he was wearing a stained wife beater. I stammered, holding out the box, and the man's face split into a grin that didn't reach his eyes at the right moment. He said, his voice a low growl, "Why don't you bring that inside?" I had to grab my wallet, and every instinct told me to get back in my car and drive away as quickly as possible, but I was new to this job, so I didn't. I didn't want to risk being fired over a misunderstanding, so I went against my better judgment and entered the house. It was dark and cluttered, and the air was heavy with the smell of cigarette smoke and something else metallic that made my nose wrinkle. The man led me through a small hallway into what I thought was the living room, and he said, "Set it down there," pointing to a coffee table covered in empty beer cans and overflowing ashtrays. He then disappeared up a creaky staircase, leaving me alone in the dark. My heart was beating so loudly that I was certain he could hear it. I looked around to see if I needed a quick exit, and that's when I noticed a duffel bag in the far corner of the room, partially hidden behind a shabby armchair. It was unzipped, and something that made my blood run cold, the barrel of a gun, was poking out of it. My mind raced, thinking that this wasn't just some strange customer, something was seriously wrong, and I had to leave. However, before I could move, I heard the man reappeared with a wad of crumpled bills in his hand, saying, "Here you go, kid, keep the change." My hand shook as I reached for the cash, and as I did, I noticed dark stains on his knuckles that suspiciously looked like dried blood. "Thank you," I managed to croak out, "have a good night," and I turned to leave, trying to keep my pace steady despite every fiber of my being screaming at me. He said in a menacing tone, "Yes, because there's nothing to hear now, why don't you get on home? It's late and these roads can be dangerous at night." I was almost to the front door when I heard a muffled thump from upstairs, followed by what sounded like a strangled cry. The man's hand clamped down on my shoulder, his grip like iron. I shook my head, not believing my voice, and my eyes darted to the door, tantalizingly close but impossibly far. Down the porch steps, my legs felt like jelly. When I got to my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so much that I could hardly get them into the ignition. As I reversed down the driveway, my headlight swept across the house one last time, and as I peeled out onto the main road, I saw a woman's face in the upstairs window. Her face was pale and terrified, her mouth open in a silent scream. I floored it, gravel spraying, and my mind reeled from the gun, the blood, the woman in the window, everything. Added up to a terrifying conclusion, I needed to call the police. However, as I reached for my phone, doubt began to creep in. What if I was mistaken? What if it was all a misunderstanding? My imagination running wild, I could lose my job or, worse, get in trouble for filing a false report. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had to decide whether to drive back to the pizzeria and pretend nothing happened or possibly save someone's life. The next few hours were a blur of questions and statements. I told the police everything, the gun, the blood, the woman in the window, and they seemed to take it seriously, especially when I gave them the address. It wasn't until the following morning that I learned the whole story. The man, it turned out, was wanted in connection with a string of disappearances across 3 states when the police raided the house. I dialed 911, my voice shaky, and told the dispatcher what I'd seen. The weeks that followed were hectic. There were more interviews with detectives, a commendation from the police department, and even a few requests for interviews from local news stations. Mario gave me a raise and told me I could take as much time off as I needed, but even as the dust settled and life returned to normal, they discovered evidence of multiple victims, including the woman I saw who was still alive but held captive in an upstairs bedroom. As things started to get back to normal, I couldn't get rid of the flashing neon sign, the rain-slicked roads, the face in the window, and the memories of that night. Every time I pull up to a house I've never been to before or knock on a stranger's door, I'm acutely aware of the thin line between ordinary and extraordinary. I continued delivering pizzas, but something about the job felt different that made it feel more important now. The lock clicked open with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine as the door swung inward, revealing the rustic interior of our rented cabin. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that we were stepping into something we couldn't easily escape. If only I'd known at the time how right that feeling was, home sweet home for the next chapter in our lives. Extraordinary between a routine delivery and a life-changing event, because sometimes the most important moments of our lives come disguised as the most mundane. I followed my boyfriend, Matt, as he cheerfully lugged our bags over the threshold and showed me the cozy living room with its stone fireplace and the small kitchen. Beyond that, it was charming in that charming, out-of-the-way kind of way. We had discovered the listing online for a remote cabin in the woods that was ideal for a romantic getaway. The pictures promised a tranquil retreat from our busy city lives, and the price had been almost too good to be true, but we seized the opportunity. Now that I was actually in the room, I felt a little uneasy. The air was stuffy and had a faint mildew odor, and the furniture, though clean, had a worn appearance that suggested years of use. Was it just me, or did the floorboards look a little too worn underfoot? I suggested opening some windows to try to calm myself down. Matt nodded and moved to the closest window, but it took a moment to budge and slide up with a protesting groan, so I suppose they don't open. As he joked, I forced a smile, but something about the window's resistance bothered me. It was almost like it didn't want to be opened. We spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking our clothes and filling the small refrigerator with the groceries we had brought. As the sun started to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Matt lit a fire in the fireplace, and the flickering light and warmth helped relieve some of my tension. "This isn't so bad," he said, putting an arm around me as we sat on the worn sofa, "just what we needed till I wanted to unwind and re-establish a connection," so I leaned into him, but as the darkness grew, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I looked out the windows, I half expected to see a face looking in at us. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to settle into the strange bed. The mattress was lumpy and the sheets had a slight mothball odor, but it wasn't just the physical discomfort that kept me awake. There were also sounds that seemed too intentional to be an old house settling. The next morning, I woke up to find Matt already up and making coffee in the kitchen. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing me a steaming mug. I shook my head and took a sip of the strong brew. "Not really," he said. "This place makes weird noises at night. That's part of the charm, isn't it? The authentic cabin experience." I wanted to argue to tell him about the footsteps I thought I'd heard, but I didn't want my paranoia to ruin our vacation, so I suggested that we go hiking after breakfast. The woods surrounding the cabin were stunning, with towering pines and dappled sunlight. For a few hours, as we hiked along hardly noticeable trails, I forgot about my uneasiness from the previous night, but as we returned to the cabin, the feeling of being watched came back stronger than ever. "Matt," I said, grabbing his arm, "do you see that he followed my gaze to a spot between two distant trees?" For a moment, I thought I saw a figure. As we got closer to the cabin, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The window we had struggled to open yesterday was now firmly shut. "Did you close that last night?" I asked Matt, trying to keep my voice steady, and he frowned. No, I don't think so. Maybe the wind blew it shut. I nodded, not wanting to voice my suspicion that there was something there. Standing there watching us, but when I blinked, it was gone. Matt was squinting in the direction I was pointing. As the day went on, more odd things started to happen. For example, objects we were certain we had left in one place would turn up in another. The temperature in some rooms would drop suddenly, creating cold spots that made no sense in the summer heat, and we always had the feeling that we were being watched. That night, as we lay in bed, the noises started again, but this time they were louder and more insistent. The creaks and groans were joined by a sound like something was being dragged across the floor mat, so I whispered to wake him up. He sat up and rubbed his eyes, but even as he was saying that, there was a loud thump from the living room, as if something heavy had fallen. Matt's eyes widened. "All right," I heard that he said. "Throw back the covers, stay here, I'll go check it out," but I grabbed his arm and we should go slowly down the hallway. Matt in front of me had a flashlight he had taken from the nightstand, and the beam of the flashlight pierced the darkness, revealing nothing. As we were about to go back to bed, I noticed something on the coffee table next to the book I had been reading earlier. With trembling hands, I picked it up and opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, the ink faded with age. As I skimmed the contents, my heart started racing. It was a diary belonging to a woman named Eleanor. Matt said, "I think it was just something outside," but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The final entry chilled me to the bone. Eleanor had written in her normally neat handwriting here, but now it's a frantic scrawl. "God help me, it's here, and I can't escape. If anyone finds this, please don't stay. Run while you still can." I looked up at Matt. My face was pale, and we needed to leave. She had lived in this cabin decades ago. She wrote about strange occurrences like objects moving on their own, voices in the night, and a presence that seemed to get stronger every day. When we heard what could only be described as a low, menacing chuckle, all of the cabin's lights went out. We didn't wait to see what would happen next, so we grabbed our phones and car keys and ran for the door. It initially resisted as if something were holding it shut, but with a last desperate shove, it flew open and we ran to our car, the gravel driveway crunching beneath our bare feet as Matt fumbled with the keys. As Matt struggled with the keys, I glanced back at the cabin through the upstairs window and saw a face that wasn't human. We didn't stop driving until we arrived at the closest town, where we checked into a motel and spent the rest of the night huddled together, jumping at every sound in the light of day. It was tempting to write off what had happened as an overactive imagination or a shared hallucination, but we both knew what we'd experienced was real, so we never went back for our belongings. However, something twisted and evil had its mouth stretched in a grotesque smile, and the engine roared to life, and we peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing. It wasn't until weeks later, when the nightmares had finally started to stop, that we decided to do some research. What we discovered made our blood run cold all over again. The cabin had a history. It turned out that over the years, several renters had fled in the middle of the night, telling tales of supernatural occurrences, and there were those who hadn't fled whose disappearances remained unsolved mysteries we count. We told the rental company that we had to leave due to an emergency, and they were surprisingly understanding, even offering a partial refund. If you're ever searching online for a charming cabin in the woods for a romantic getaway, be careful, because sometimes the ideal retreat is too good to be true, and sometimes the things that go bump in the night are all too real. The first indication that something was wrong was the master bedroom door, which was closed, but I never closed it. We were fortunate to have escaped, but sometimes late at night I still feel that watchful presence and wonder if somehow a piece of whatever was in that cabin followed us home. The Wilsons were loaded, and their sprawling mansion sat on 5 acres of well-kept lawns and gardens. It was the kind of place where you'd expect to find a butler named Jeeves, not a 20-year-old student watering plants and feeding cats. Mrs. Wilson laughed as she said, "You'll have the run of the place." Ever since I started house-sitting for the Wilsons 2 days ago, I stood there with my hand hovering over the doorknob, a chill creeping up my spine despite the summer heat. Handed me the keys, but don't throw any crazy parties while we're away, as if I knew anyone who would want to party in this mausoleum of marble and antiques. No, I'd spent most of my time raiding their well-stocked fridge and binge-watching shows on their enormous TV. It was supposed to be a simple job, but now that I was staring at that closed door, easy was the last thing on my mind. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and the door silently opened, revealing the immaculate master suite. Everything looked normal: the king-size, the Shah lounge by the window, the bed with its mountain of pillows, the doors to the walk-in closet, and the en-suite bathroom, but something felt strange. I couldn't quite place it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was like entering a room that was exactly like the picture you saw in your mind, but it didn't feel right. I shook my head, trying to shake off the paranoia I was experiencing, probably from watching too many scary movies on that large TV. I was ready to leave when I smelled a slight smell. With trembling hands, I opened the jewelry box on the dresser, which caught my attention because it was slightly skewed. I didn't know much about jewelry, but even I could tell that the glittering diamonds and pearls inside were worth a fortune, and they all seemed to be there if someone had broken them. Something floral and unfamiliar. It wasn't Mrs. Wilson's usual perfume, which lingered on her clothes in the closet, made my heart race. Had someone been in here? Why wouldn't they take these? I was alone in the house, the cats were outside, the cleaning service wasn't due for days, and the Wilsons weren't expected back from their European vacation for another week. I crept to the top of the grand staircase, straining my ears, thinking that maybe I had imagined the silence, but then I heard it again, the distinct sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. Panic struck, and I assumed I should flee house and call the police, but I had to find out who was down there as quietly as possible because I was curious about that deadly impulse that has felled so many horror movie protagonists. I was thankful for the soft carpet that muffled my footsteps as I made my way down the stairs. The noises from the kitchen became louder, like someone fixing themselves a drink. I peered around the corner into the kitchen, and my blood ran cold. There, standing at the marble island, a tall, well-built man with his back to me was wearing expensive clothing that seemed out of place with the fact that he was, a burglar. I must have gasped or whimpered, but who knows, because he turned and we both froze for a second before he smiled. It wasn't the menacing smile of a villain caught in the act, rather, it was warm and almost friendly. "You must be the house sitter. Care for a drink?" he said in a smooth, cultured voice, and I stood there, my mouth open, unable to comprehend what was happening. This man broke into the house I was supposed to be watching, and he offered me a drink as if we were at a cocktail party. "Who are you?" I finally stammered out, and he laughed, taking a sip from his glass on a family friend. "You could say that Thomas Wilson and I went back a long way." I scowled, and Mr. Wilson said, "I don't believe you," trying to sound braver than I felt. I reached for my phone, but before I could call the police. I could dial, but he spoke again. "If I were you, I wouldn't do that unless you want Thomas to find out about your little explorations." I froze, wondering how he could know that I had been so careful on my second night here. Curiosity had taken over, and I had begun looking through papers and opening drawers in Mr. Wilson's study, telling myself that I was just being thorough in my house-sitting duties, but I knew deep down that it was wrong. The man smiled again, but this time there was a hint of concern. "Oh, yes, I know all about that, just as I know about the little joy ride you took in the Bentley yesterday, Skid." What would the Wilsons say? My mind raced. How could he know these things unless you've been watching me? I said, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Bright girl," he said. "Yes, I've been keeping an eye on things to make sure the Wilsons' property is secure, but why?" I asked. My voice was barely above a whisper. "Who are you really?" He put down his glass and leaned against the counter, staring at me intensely. "Let's say I have a vested interest. Interest in the Wilsons' affairs and in ensuring that some sensitive information stays confidential made my heart race. I was certain he could hear it. What kind of information, the kind that could destroy a man like Thomas Wilson, did he say in a low, dangerous voice that would be worth killing for? I gasped, taking an involuntary step back. He shrugged, the gesture casual, but his eyes never left mine. Blackmail is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement that has been. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now, my dear, you have a choice. You can forget this ever happened, finish your house-sitting job, and walk away with a nice paycheck and your conscience clear," or he let the word hang in the air heavy with implication, or what I whispered. "I've been working quite well for years, but my mind was spinning about the ideal wealthy Wilson, what dark secrets they were hiding, and what I had stumbled into. What happened now?" I felt sick, but he was right. I had no proof and I'd abused the Wilsons' trust. Even if they believed me, I'd still be in trouble, so what will it be? He asked, picking up his glass again. I stood there, frozen in indecision, but the obvious thing to do was to call the police and tell the Wilsons what I've seen. But think about this. Who do you think they'll believe? A trusted family friend or a college student who has been snooping through their personal belongings and enjoys riding in their cars? But in the end, I was held back by fear that my primal instinct for self-preservation held me back. It wasn't bravery or morality that made the decision, it was just plain dumb luck. At that moment, headlights swept across the kitchen window and a car was approaching from the driveway. The man's eyes widened in surprise and he muttered, "It's not possible that they're not due back for days," but the sound of car doors slamming followed by familiar voices proved him wrong. The Wilsons were home early in the chaos that ensued from the Wilsons' shock at discovering an intruder, and my fumbling explanations didn't work. I lost my house-sitting jobs, of course, but I gained something far more valuable, a story I'll never forget and a lesson about the dangers of curiosity, and every time I pass a grand house with its well-kept lawns and shining windows, I can't help but wonder. The truth of the man's smooth lies came out, and it wasn't pretty. There were tears, accusations, threats of legal action, and recriminations, but justice won out in the end. The security camera feed flickered to life, revealing an empty corridor bathed in the sickly glow of fluorescent lights. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes straining in the darkness of the security office, and that's when I saw a shadow darting across the screen there. I've learned my lesson that some doors are better left unopened and some questions are better left unasked, because you never know when you might find yourself caught in someone else's dangerous game. My name is Mike, and I've been working the night shift at Grayson Tech for about 6 months. It's a large, soulless office building on the outskirts of the city, all steel and glass, and it's eerily quiet after hours. Normally, my biggest challenge is staying awake, but tonight was different. I flipped through the various camera feeds looking for any signs of movement, but there was nothing on the ground floor or in the stairwells. My heart rate quickly increased. My initial reaction was to call the police when I switched to the view of the executive offices on the top floor and noticed a figure moving quickly between the cubicles, obviously trying to avoid detection. However, for some reason, I refrained from doing so. Perhaps it was curiosity or the persistent suspicion that there was more going on here than just a simple break-in. Whatever the reason, I found myself reaching for the key card that would grant me access to the upper floors, and the elevator ride to the top floor seemed to take forever. The door slid open with a soft ding that seemed deafening in the night silence, and I cautiously stepped outside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The executive floor was a labyrinth of cubicles and corner offices, most of which were filled with modern computers and expensive-looking furniture. I moved slowly, my ears straining for any sound, and for a brief moment, all I could hear was the soft hum of electronics, and then my heart began to pound, and then, from somewhere to my left, I heard the distinct sound of typing creeping towards the noise. I turned a corner and froze there, surrounded by the blue glow of a computer screen. Sarah Chin, one of the senior software engineers, Miss Chin, was sitting there. I called out in a shaky voice, and she whirled around, her eyes wide with fear. Was that Guilt? Who are you? She demanded, and I moved forward, shining my flashlight badge, Mike Thompson Knight. Sarah's shoulders slumped, and I thought for a second that she might lose it. But then she straightened up, a determined expression on her face. I'm uncovering the truth, she said, and now that you're here, you need to see this too, confused and more than a little wary. I stepped closer, and Sarah reopened the laptop, revealing lines of code that meant nothing to me. Grayson Tech isn't what you think it is, she said in a low voice and urgent. The software we're developing isn't just for business analytics. The implications hit me like a truck if what she was saying was true. It's a surveillance tool more powerful than anything that's ever existed. I scowled, not quite understanding what you mean, Sarah. She took a deep breath. It can track anyone, anywhere, via social media, security cameras, and financial transactions, and it pulls everything together in real time. It's being sold to governments, corporations, and anyone who can afford it. I said, I need your help. I'm gathering evidence, but I can't do this alone if they catch me. Sarah didn't need to finish the sentence because we both knew what happened to corporate whistleblowers. I should have said no and walked away, pretending I hadn't seen any of this, but something in her eyes made me nod. What do you need me to do for the next hour? Sarah showed me what she found. As the evening went on, I found myself drawn further into a world of corporate espionage and government conspiracies. It was like something out of a movie, except this time, the danger was real, and we were so focused on our work that we nearly missed the sound of the elevator arriving on our floor. The secret servers were hidden in the basement of the building, the coded messages and seemingly innocent emails, and the offshore accounts where the money from these illegal sales was being funneled. She whispered, pale, they're here. I didn't have to ask who they were, so we quickly turned off the computer and ducked behind a row of cubicles. Peering over the top, I saw two men in pricey suits exit the elevator. Even from a distance, I could see the bulk of weapons under their jackets. We need to leave, I said to Sarah. She nodded, holding a small flash drive that held all the evidence we had gathered. Slowly, we started to head for the emergency stairs at the far end of the office, and we could hear the men were moving through the cubicles, their voices low but angry, and we knew you were there. One of them called out to Sarah, make this easy on yourself. You know you can't win against us. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness, and she squeezed it tightly, and I could feel her trembling, but her voice remained steady as she whispered, we have to make it. The world needs to know the truth. We were almost to the stairs when disaster struck, and in the darkness, I tripped over a trash can, sending it clattering across the floor. The noise was deafening in the quiet office. As we descended, my mind raced because we couldn't go to the lobby because they would have that covered, but perhaps this way, I gasped and pulled Sarah through a door on the third floor, which, if I remembered the building layout correctly, had a fire escape on this level that led to the alley behind. One of the men shouted, footsteps pounded towards us, so I yelled and pushed Sarah towards the stairs. We started down, taking the steps two at a time. I heard the men in pursuit, their shoes echoing in the stairwell. As we ran through the darkened office, we heard our pursuers' cries getting closer. As we reached the window leading to the fire escape, I fumbled with the latch, my hands slick with perspiration, and just as the office door exploded, the window swung free. I urged Sarah to help her through, and I followed quickly, pulling the window shut behind us. The metal of the fire escape creaked menacingly as we clambered down above us, and I could hear the men cursing as they realized where we'd gone. As we rounded the corner of the building, we were speeding away from Grayson Tech, the city lights blurring around us as the adrenaline started to wear off and the reality of what we'd just done began to set in. Sarah clutched the flash drive like it was a lifeline, which, in a sense, was behind us. Sarah panted as we rounded the corner of the building, and I could hear the men starting down the fire escape in this way. As we drove through the night, leaving the city and its secrets behind, I couldn't help but think about how much people would kill to keep secrets a secret. Sarah's eyes were fixed on the road ahead, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We take this to someone who can help. I have a contact at a news organization if we can get this information to them." I nodded, understanding that it wasn't over by a long shot, but we had a chance now, a chance to expose the truth and maybe, just maybe, make a difference. I didn't know what the future held, whether we would succeed or become just another pair of anonymous victims in the struggle between truth and power, but I did know one thing. I couldn't go back to my old life after what I'd witnessed as the first rays of dawn appeared on the horizon. My life had changed in a matter of hours, going from a simple night security guard to a conspirator in what could be one of the biggest whistleblowing events in history. The night shift at Grayson Tech was over, but our real work was just getting started. The rusty gate creaked open, protesting through the still night air. I hesitated, 1 foot on the overgrown path leading to the abandoned Oakwood Asylum. The dilapidated building loomed before us, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring down accusingly. I knew this was a bad idea, but the thrill was worth it. I took a deep breath and stepped fully onto the property, the gate clanging shut behind me with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. There were 4 of us: Mia, our self-appointed leader; Jake, her boyfriend and resident skeptic; Liv, our amateur photographer; and me. The reluctant voice of reason that no one ever listened to was me. The excitement of adventure and the encouragement of my friends pushed me forward, so don't back down, Alex. Oakwood had become the subject of local legend. Ghost hunters and thrill seekers had attempted to explore it over the years, but most had been scared off by the building's deteriorating state or chased away by the police. However, tonight was different because the full moon provided just enough light to navigate by, and Mia's cousin on the police force had tipped her off. This was the first time in weeks that Mia had come across an article about the asylum's dark history. The asylum was opened in the 1800s and closed in the 1970s due to allegations of patient abuse and unethical experiments. The weight of the building's history seemed to weigh down on us as we approached the main entrance. Graffiti covered the lower walls in a crass attempt to cover up the institution's grim past with color. Liv took a few pictures and the flash briefly illuminated the dilapidated porch. "All right, everyone remembered the plan?" Mia whispered, her excitement palpable. "We stick to it together, don't touch anything we don't have to, and if anyone wants to leave, we all leave." We nodded in agreement, but I noticed the front door was chained shut, but Jake quickly removed it with the bolt cutters he had brought. The chain came off with a clank that seemed to echo forever in the quiet night. Mia pushed the door open, and we were hit by a wave of musty, stale air. Entering the room felt like entering a different world, and our flashlights showed a reception area with dust-covered chairs lined with. We moved deeper into the building, our footsteps echoing off the peeling walls, and the beam of my flashlight caught something etched into the paint. A name helped me scratch with desperate intensity, and I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. The walls and an old reception desk stood sentinel, its surface littered with moldering papers and long-dead plants. "This is amazing," Liv breathed, and her camera clicked quickly. "It's like they just walked out one day and never returned." As we gathered around, I noticed that the atmosphere grew thicker with dust and decay, and we passed by old treatment rooms with rusted and menacing equipment. In one hallway, an overturned gurney made us all jump, its wheels squeaking slightly as our movement disturbed decades of stillness. "Hey, look!" Jake called out in a voice that was abnormally loud in the silence, and he was standing in front of a heavy metal door with deep scratches on its surface. It looked like someone really wanted to leave. As we entered the room, I noticed a change in the air. It was cooler here with a faint breeze that shouldn't have been possible in a sealed building. "Guys, I don't like this," I said, barely raising my voice above a whisper. "Maybe we should." It seemed cleaner somehow, less dusty, and before I could point this out, Mia was already pushing it open. The room beyond was pitch black, swallowing our flashlight beams. La screamed in the darkness, and I heard her camera clattering on the floor. "What the hell?" Jake's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Mia? Were you all okay?" I struggled to hold my flashlight steady as my hands shook so much that I could hardly hold it. When I managed to get it to work, the beam showed us a room that hadn't been there just a moment ago. The dilapidated asylum interior had vanished, and we were in what appeared to be a modern laboratory, complete with gleaming stainless steel and softly humming machinery. Whispered, "Where are we?" Before anyone could respond, a door at the far end of the room hissed open, and a figure entered. It was backlit, so we couldn't see any features, but its silhouette was all wrong, too tall, with limbs too long and joined in impossible ways. "We've been waiting for you," it said, its voice a harsh metallic rasp that made my teeth tense. Panic set in, and we turned to run, only to discover that the door we had entered was gone and had been replaced by a smooth, featureless wall, trapping us. The nightmare that ensued was filled with flashing lights, screeching alarms, and the constant, terrifying presence of our inhuman hosts. They dragged us through endless hallways, separated us, and put us through tests and procedures that I still find difficult to explain. I lost all sense of time, and it might have taken hours or days before I was reunited with my friends in that first room. We had changed in both subtle and significant ways, and Jake's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and his skin had a metallic sheen to it. Mia, we were outside once more, standing in front of the abandoned asylum as if nothing had happened, but we knew better. The windows of the building now gleamed with an unearthly light, and we could hear the faint hum of machinery from within. We staggered away, each lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had happened to us, and we arrived at the gate. Wasn't Mia anymore? The figure from before stood watching us, its featureless face somehow conveying amusement. We never talked about that night again because we didn't think anyone would believe us, but occasionally when I catch a glimpse of the strange glow in Liv's eyes or notice how Jake's skin reflects light just a little too perfectly, I'm reminded that our adventure was all too real and late at night. I turned back for one last look, and for a brief moment, the asylum seemed to shimmer, its form shifting subtly before my eyes. I don't know if we unearthed some long-buried secret that night or if we stumbled into something that wasn't meant for human eyes, but I do know that the next time someone suggests exploring an abandoned building, I'll be running in the opposite direction because sometimes it's better left undiscovered. I swear, on a quiet night when the moon is full, I can hear that metallic voice calling me back to Oakwood Asylum, the place where everything changed and where I fear a part of me will always be there. Even though I tell myself that some doors are meant to remain closed forever, I can't help but feel that our experience at Oakwood was only the beginning and that similar experiments are happening somewhere else in the world in other deserted places. I wonder with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity what will happen when whatever is behind it all decides it's time to stop hiding for the time being. But I'll keep my head down and try to live a normal life. But a part of me will always be watchful. While the GPS cheerfully announced that I had reached my destination, I stared out the windshield, my hand still gripping the steering wheel. at a town that was definitely not Millbrook. The faded welcome sign read Willow Creek population. I was looking for signs that the world isn't what it seems, because once you've seen behind the curtain, there's no going back. In the end, the most terrifying thing isn't what we found in that asylum, but rather the knowledge that it's still out there waiting for its next unwary victims. I had been driving for hours to get to my cousin's wedding in Millbrook, but somewhere along the way, my usually trustworthy GPS had taken me off course. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in menacing shades of red and purple, I found myself in a place that appeared to have been forgotten by time, with Willow Creek's main street stretching ahead of me, lined with buildings that seemed more appropriate for the 1950s than the present day. Neon signs flickered once a week, shop windows moved, and the few people on the sidewalks moved with an odd shuffling gait that made me nervous. I pulled over, took my phone out of my pocket, and tried to figure out where I'd gone wrong. But there was no signal, so I sighed and accepted that I would have to ask for directions the old-fashioned way. The diner across the street seemed like a good place to start, and its chrome exterior gleamed dully in the fading light. The diner's best pie in the county was announced by a buzzing sign and light. As soon as I got out of my car, the humid air clung to my skin, and as I got closer to the diner, the few people on the street stopped to stare at me, their eyes unnaturally wide and unblinking. I accelerated my pace and pushed open the door with more force than was necessary, attracting the attention of everyone inside. I mean everyone, with the bell above the door jangling discordantly. I cleared my throat and said, "Hello, I'm a little lost. Could someone point me in the direction of Mbrook?" Then, slowly, the conversation resumed as if I hadn't spoken, and the customers returned to their meals, forks moving mechanically from plate to mouth. A waitress appeared at my elbow, making me jump. Her name tag read, and her smile was slightly too big. Unison looked at me for a moment, her eyes glazed and her expression blank. My instinct was telling me to get out of there and get back in my car and drive as fast and far as I could. But something in Dot's eyes held me in place. It wasn't kindness exactly, more like hunger. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a booth with a slice of cherry pie in front of me that I had definitely not ordered. "Why to be natural, honey? You're a long way from Millbrook," she said in a syrupy sweet voice. "Why don't you sit down and have a slice of pie while we figure out how to get you back on track?" The pie filling glistened in a way that uncomfortably reminded me of fresh blood. I took a small bite, and my senses were immediately overwhelmed. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted, sweet and tart and rich in a way that seemed impossible. I found myself taking another bite and another, unable to stop as I ate. The diner around me seemed to shift and blur. The patrons' movements became more fluid and natural, and the music became more natural. "There isn't that better?" she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Now tell me what brings you to our little town." I blinked, trying to remember why I was hearing something about a wedding, but that seemed so unimportant now that I'm not sure I admitted it. "Don't worry, honey." Dot patted my hand, her touch sending an electric jolt up my arm. "That's all right, honey. Lots of folks find their way here when they're a bit lost." We Creek has a way of I followed her out of the diner, my legs moving on their own accord, the street busier now, full of people strolling and chatting, and they all smiled and nodded at me as if I were an old friend they'd been expecting at the hotel. Calling to those who need it, I nodded, finding comfort in her words. The pie was gone, but I didn't remember finishing it outside. Night had fallen completely, and the street was now illuminated by the warm glow of old-fashioned street lamps. The lobby was a blur of dark wood and red velvet, and I vaguely remember signing something after being handed a heavy brass key. The Victorian architecture of the grand old building stood in stark contrast to the more modest structures around it, and as we climbed the steps, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. Dot steadied me with a hand on my elbow, her touch both comforting and unsettling. "Don't worry," she said, her voice sounding distant and echoing. "Everyone feels a little off at first, but you'll get used to it." I heard Dot's voice one last time, but I couldn't see her in the room. "Welcome to Willow Creek, honey. You're home." I woke up with a start, sunshine streaming through lace curtains. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there, and then everything came flooding back. The wrong turn, the strange town, Dot's diner, the pie. I sat up in my head. The wallpaper swirled in patterns that seemed to move when I wasn't looking at them. It felt like the entire town was trapped in a time warp. The room around me was thumping like something from a period drama, complete with antique furniture and faded elegance. But there was something strange about it, like a movie set that wasn't quite realistic up close. I staggered to the window and pulled back the curtains. The street below was busy, but it was all wrong. 1950s cars cruised by, fins gleaming in the morning sun. Women in poodle skirts and men in fedoras walked down the sidewalk. Help! But when I reached for it, my pockets were empty. In fact, I realized with increasing horror that I was wearing completely different clothes. A button-up shirt and high-waisted pants that looked like they were from a vintage store. Room service knocked, and I cautiously opened the door to find Dot standing there balancing a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and another piece of that damn pie. "Good morning, sunshine," she said, "thinking that you might need to come get me after your lengthy journey. Willow Creek is a special place for special people who need a fresh start and want to forget their troubles. And you, my dear, looked like you needed that more than most." I shook my head in an attempt to clear the fog that still clung to my thoughts, but I didn't want this. I was just passing through. "I need to get back." Dot interrupted her. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. "What is this place? What did you do to me?" Dot's smile never wavered. "I think old Mr. Johnson's daughter is getting married this weekend, and I'm sure they'd be happy to have you join the celebration." The way she said it made it clear that this wasn't a suggestion, and I felt a chill go down my spine as I realized the true nature of my situation. This wasn't just a strange town. It was a trap, and I had walked right into it. "I think I'd like to leave now," I said, trying to calm myself, eyes gleaming. "Honey, is that what's got you so worked up?" Maintain my composure. Dot's smile turned sad. "Oh honey, don't you realize that nobody ever truly leaves Willow Creek? But don't worry, you'll love it here. We all do in the end." As if on cue, a group of town residents appeared in the hallway behind her. Their eyes had the same hungry expression I'd noticed the previous evening, and their smiles were exactly like Dot's. Dot suggested taking my hand because, after all, we're your family. I wanted to stop myself from screaming, but Dot's fingers closed. As Dot led me down the stairs, I felt the last of my resistance ebbing away. Willow Creek may not have been my intended destination, but perhaps it was where I was meant to be all along. The sun shone brightly outside the building. I felt the same electric jolt from the previous night around me, and suddenly the idea didn't seem so bad after all. After all, wasn't this what I'd always wanted? A place to belong. A simpler life free from the stresses of the modern world? This was supposed to be a peaceful hike, a chance to clear my head and enjoy nature. But in an instant, it had turned into something far more dangerous. I had set out early that morning, driving to a remote trailhead that I had found online that promised stunning views. But as I stepped out into it hand in hand with my new family, I couldn't quite remember why I had ever wanted to leave. The first gunshot broke the stillness of the forest, sending birds scattering into the sky, and I froze, my heart thumping in my chest. For the first few hours, the crisp autumn air, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet, and the sense of solitude that was difficult to find in the city had been everything I had hoped for. However, as I stood there, rooted to the spot, straining my ears for any more sounds, I realized how isolated I truly was. Miles from civilization, no cell phone signal, and apparently sharing the woods with someone armed and potentially dangerous. For a moment, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was just a hunter. The shot had sounded too close and too deliberate, and then there was another crack that echoed through the trees closer. This time, the words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakably angry. My instincts took over, and I dove behind a large oak tree to try to hide as small as possible. I looked around the forest, and the dense undergrowth that had previously seemed so beautiful now felt oppressive, possibly hiding threats from every direction. It wasn't hunting season. I tried to keep my breathing under control because I knew that any noise would reveal where I was. Then, about 50 yards away, two men in camouflage burst through the brush. They were carrying rifles and moving deliberately, their eyes searching the forest floor for poachers. I was startled to realize that they were chasing something or someone, and I pressed myself harder against the tree, willing myself to become invisible. The men were approaching, and their voices were now clear enough for me they weren't hunting animals. They were hunting a person who had seen something they shouldn't have, someone who was now hurt and fleeing for their life, and I was caught in the middle of it. I knew I should stay hidden, wait for them to pass, and then quickly and quietly make my way back to my car. But one of them growled, "Not with that wound. We can't let him get away." The other responded, his voice tight with tension, "If he talks, we're done for." Taking a deep breath, I made a decision that would change everything. As soon as the poachers passed my hiding place, I started to move in the opposite direction, searching for any sign of their wounded quarry. The forest was eerily quiet now, as if holding its breath. I moved as silently as I could, my eyes darting from tree to tree looking for anything out of place. A broken branch, a scuff mark in the dirt, anything. A nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let me. A smear of red on a tree trunk about chest height made my stomach turn, but I persisted in following the intermittent trail deeper into the woods. The sound of running water became louder, and soon I found myself at the edge of a small stream, where I saw him. A man in his 40s probably, slumped against a boulder. His shirt was soaked in blood. His face was pale and drawn with pain, and his eyes widened in fear. That might indicate someone had passed through in a hurry. He nodded weakly as I approached him, reaching for something at his side. I raised my hands to show that I was unarmed and that I was here to help. I whispered, "Those men are after you, right?" He managed to say, "Caught them illegal hunting operation, big operation, dangerous people, between gasping breaths. I knelt next to him, assessing his wound. The bullet had caught him in the shoulder, and although it was bleeding heavily, it didn't appear to be life-threatening at first. But he had lost a lot of blood. Even a small wound could be fatal in the wilderness, so we need to move, I said, shrugging off my backpack. Can you walk? He nodded again, gritting his teeth as I helped him stand up. I quickly wrapped his wound as best I could using supplies from my first aid kit, then let him lean on me. As we began to move, our progress was excruciatingly slow, with every snapping twig and leaf rustle sounding like a gunshot in the silent forest. I had no real plan other than to put some distance between us and the poachers in the hopes of finding higher ground where we might get away. We had been traveling for about 20 minutes when we heard voices carried by the wind. The PORS had followed our trail there, and the warden whispered that we could lose them in the steep hill cave system. It was dangerous, and if we got lost in the caves, we would be in even more trouble, but we had no choice. We began the climb, each step a struggle for the injured man. And as we arrived at the cave entrance, a shout came from behind us, indicating that they had spotted us. Without hesitation, we dove in. When we finally emerged from a narrow tunnel into a larger cavern, faint light filtered in from somewhere above, revealing a space about the size of a small room. Mike collapsed against the wall, his breathing ragged. The next few hours were a blur of dark passages, stumbling steps, and heart-stopping moments of silence as we listened for our pursuers. The warden, whose name I learned was Mike, guided us as best he could, but it was obvious he was deteriorating. Mike nodded grimly, saying, "There's a backup gun in my boot. You know how to shoot," he said, shaking my head. The only time I had ever shot was at a carnival booth. Mike sighed, then went over the fundamentals. We didn't have to wait long, as the sound of footsteps grew louder in the tunnel. I positioned myself behind a large rock, my heart thumping so hard that I was certain it would reveal our location when the first poacher entered. The second poacher rushed into the cavern with his rifle aimed at Mike, and time seemed to slow down as I noticed the poacher's finger tightening on the trigger. I was praying that I wouldn't have to use it when a shower of loose rocks clattered down from above, startling the man. In that moment of distraction, Mike leaped from his hiding place and tackled the poacher to the ground. The gun went off, making the sound deafening in the enclosed space for a terrifying moment. In the confusion that ensued, I somehow found some rope in my backpack, and we tied up the poachers, who had both been subdued more by surprise than by our fighting skills. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had just happened hit me, and I sank to the ground, my entire body shuddering. Mike sat heavily. Without thinking, I pulled the trigger and fired the gun, kicking it in my hand. The shot went wide, but it was enough. Mike's face broke into a relieved grin as he said, "I missed my check-in," he said. Beside me, his face is pale, but his eyes are clear. "You did good, kid," he said softly. Not many people would have stopped to help a stranger in the woods. I guess I watched too many superhero movies as a kid. He claimed that I missed my check-in. As the sound got louder, sunlight suddenly flooded the cavern, and a hole in the ceiling that had gone unnoticed was big enough for us to be seen. As I testified to police and park rangers in the days that followed, it became evident that the poachers were a part of a large illegal hunting operation that had been targeting endangered species in the area for years. Our actions had resulted in the bust of a major wildlife crime ring. Mike recovered from his injuries and made sure I was acknowledged for my role in the incident. But the biggest reward was I now carry a more complete first aid kit, a satellite phone, and a newfound appreciation for the unexpected turns life can take whenever I go hiking. The forest is still my sanctuary, but I navigate it with open eyes, always aware that adventure and the chance to make a difference might be waiting just around the next bend in the trail. The last call for drinks reverberated through the deserted bar, my voice sounding as I cleaned the counter for the 100th time on a Friday night. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right. Perhaps it was the storm that was approaching outside, or perhaps it was just my imagination working overtime in the eerie silence. In any case, I was counting down the minutes until I could lock up and go home. My name is Sarah, and I'm the bartender extraordinaire. I've been working at the Rusty Nail for 3 years, but I'd never seen it this dead. There was nothing left to do but wait when a flash of lightning illuminated the world outside, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the windows. I had already cleaned every glass, restocked every bottle, and swept the floor twice, and my boss had even called it quits early. So I was given strict instructions to close up shop at midnight sharp, no exceptions. The ancient clock above the bar ticked closer to the hour with each movement of its hands feeling like an eternity. I was polishing a glass when I heard a faint scraping sound that was barely audible over the rain hitting the roof. I froze, straining my ears, and realized that it was coming from the back of the bar near the storage room. I called out, hating how my voice trembled, and then there was unmistakably the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps approaching me. My heart raced as I looked around the bar for anything I could use as a weapon, and I decided on at the far end of the bar, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, broad-shouldered man with his face hidden beneath the hood of a dark jacket walked with an unnerving grace, each step precise and measured. I was carrying a heavy bottle of bourbon and gripped it tightly as I edged towards the end of the bar. I'm armed, I lied to sound more confident than I felt, and I've already called the police. For a moment, the only sounds I could hear were the storm and the pounding of my own heart. He chuckled as he stepped into the dim light from the bar's old neon signs, and I caught a glimpse of his face. His eyes were dark and intense, fixed on me with an unsettling focus, but it was his smile that really got to me, too many teeth, like a predator eyeing its prey. "We're closed," I said, repeating my knuckles white around the neck of the bourbon bottle. "You need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice down. "I'm not here for money, Sarah. I'm here for something far more valuable." The fact that he knew my name sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I looked at the door to see if I would run, and the man's smile widened. "I wouldn't if I were you," he said softly. "Now how about that drink?" My bartending instincts took over for a moment, overriding my fear. "Stay calm, I don't want any trouble. Take whatever's in the till and go. I won't call the cops, I swear." I set down the bourbon and reached for a glass. My mind raced trying to think of a way out of this situation. I had the phone in my pocket, but there was no way I could call for help without him noticing. Maybe if I could distract him in some way, I settled on a classic old-fashioned. My hands moving almost automatically as I mixed the drink helped calm my nerves, if only slightly. His eyes never left my face and my hands were shaking. I kept my tone as casual as possible and said, "Come here often." He smirked, obviously amused by my attempt at small talk, which was actually my first time, "but I've been watching you for a while," and his words, leaning forward, "You have something I need," sent a chill down my spine. I slid the finished drink across the bar, careful to keep my distance, thinking, "I'm just a bartender, I don't have anything valuable." "Oh, but you do," he said. When he reached for the glass, his sleeve lifted slightly to reveal an odd symbol tattooed on his wrist. It resembled a series of connected circles with what appeared to be an eye in the middle. Something about it felt strange and unnatural, and he caught me staring and smiled that big smile again, asking, "Are you good?" Curiosity is the first step to what I asked, and he couldn't help but nod gratefully. He took a sip of his drink and nodded. Awakening to seeing the world as it truly is great, I thought not just a creepy stalker, but a creepy. His expression darkened, all pretense of friendliness disappearing as he said, "I need to end this fast." Listen, trying to sound firm. "I don't know what you think I have, but you're mistaken. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Sarah, I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you, until you give me what I came for and what exactly I demanded," he said, fear turning to anger. In response, he reached into his jacket and produced a small, ornate box, which was made of some. As he placed it on the bar, I could swear I heard a faint whisper from inside the box. He said in a low, intense voice, "This is a key that can only be used by someone with a very special gift, a gift that you possess whether you know it or not." I stared at the box with a sense of dread washing over me. Part of me wanted to grab it and run, but another part wanted to smash it to pieces, so I forced myself to look at him. "I don't know what I said. I don't have any gift. I'm just a normal person trying to do my job," and he shook his head with a pitying expression on his face. "Oh, Sarah, there's nothing normal about you. Why do you think you've always felt different? Why do you think you can sometimes sense things before they happen? Why do you think the spirits in this old bar whisper to you when no one else is around?" I took a step back, my mind reeling. How could he know about the whispers? I had never told anyone about those, convinced I was just imagining. The air in the bar seemed to thicken as he spoke. The shadows in the corners grew deeper and more menacing, and the whispers I'd always dismissed as my own secrets were revealed by this stranger. "What are you?" I whispered, and his smile returned, but this time it contained a hint of sadness. "I am a keeper, one of those charged with maintaining the balance between this world and the ones beyond, and you, Sarah, are a gatekeeper, one with the power to open doors that should remain closed or to seal them shut forever." "This isn't real," I said, but even as I was saying it, I knew deep down in a part of myself that I'd always tried to ignore that he was telling the truth. "It's very real," he said softly, "and it's time for you to accept your role." I looked at the box, then back at him, and realized that I was standing on a precipice. One decision would return me to my normal life, tending to the bar and acting as though I hadn't heard. As the whispers reached a crescendo and the shadows seemed to close in around us, I realized there was only one option. With a trembling hand, I reached for the box. As my fingers touched the carved wood, a surge of energy shot through me. The box sprang open, revealing a key that seemed to be made of pure light. As I lifted it, the world around me shifted, reality peeling away to reveal glimpses of other places, other times. "Stranger," the keeper nodded in agreement, and he said, "And so it begins." His voice seemed to come from a great distance, and I gripped the key to my chest, feeling its power running through me. No matter what challenges this new reality held, I knew that my life would never be the same. The rusty nail vanished, taking with it my previous life as just another bartender in just another small-town bar. A new journey was beginning, and I somehow knew that it was one I had been preparing my entire life for. The crunch of twigs under heavy boots startled us out of our tranquility. We had come here to escape the world, but it seemed the world had found us anyway, and it was armed. Emma and I froze our coffee mugs halfway to our lips as we locked eyes across the cabin's small porch in the morning. It was supposed to be the ideal getaway, a charming cabin tucked away in the woods miles from the closest town, with no cell service and only the sounds of nature to keep us company. Emma had found it online, a last-minute booking for a long weekend, just what we needed, she said, her eyes glimmering. For the first day and a half, everything had been perfect. We had hiked, swam in the crystal-clear lake, and spent long hours just sitting on the porch talking and laughing like we hadn't done in years. However, as the sound of voices drifted through the trees, that bubble of tranquility shattered. "Did you hear Emma whispering, setting her mug down with a trembling hand?" I nodded, my mind racing, thinking that it might be other hikers. Emma opened her mouth to protest, but another sound cut her off, the unmistakable metallic click of a gun being cocked. We slipped inside the cabin and closed the door as quietly as possible. Through the window, I could see movement at the edge of the clearing. I thought it was the property owner or myself, but the tension in the air and the way the forest had suddenly gone quiet told me this was something else entirely. "Now get inside." Camouflage, their faces hidden behind thick beards and low-brimmed hats, Emma asked what we should do. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I shook my head in confusion. We were trapped in the cabin, which had only 4 walls and a roof and no basement or secret passages. Suddenly, we felt very vulnerable to the threat outside. The men were getting closer, and their voices were clear enough for us to make out what they were saying. "I'm telling you, I saw something," one of them said in an urgent tone that made me swear I could have sworn it was a person. "It better not be," the other replied in a gruff voice. Emma tugged at my sleeve and pointed to the back of the cabin, where a small window barely big enough for a person to squeeze through was our only chance. We moved silently, gathering what we could, including our phones, which were useless without signal, a flashlight, and a bottle of water. As Emma worked on opening the window, I looked around the cabin for anything we could use as a weapon, and my eyes fell on a heavy cast iron skillet hanging by the door. I couldn't have any witnesses to what we had stumbled into, and my blood ran cold. Stove. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The window creaked as Emma pushed it open, and the sound was unbelievably loud in the tense silence. We both froze, listening to the voices outside having stopped. I whispered to Emma, giving her a boost, and she slithered through the opening, landing with a soft thud on the other side. I passed her our makeshift supplies and started to squeeze through myself. I was halfway out when I heard the cabin door slam open, and "Hey," a voice shouted, "We've got runners." My adrenaline shot through me as I fell out of the window, scraping my Emma pulled me to my feet on the rough wood, and we started running. The forest branches were tearing at our faces, and the roots were threatening to trip us with each step. I could hear the men shouting through the underbrush, and as we got farther away, their cries became softer. We ran until our legs felt like lead and our lungs burned, and then we ducked behind a big fallen tree. I think we lost them because Emma's face was flushed and streaked with dirt. I nodded, not believing myself, to it was almost possible to think that the last 30 minutes had been some kind of surreal dream, but the pain in my muscles and the fear still churning in my gut told me it was all too real. I finally said, my mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who were those men? What were they doing out here? And most importantly, how are we going to get out of this alive? As our breathing slowed, the sounds of the forest returned, birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had, so we started moving as fast and silently as we could through the dense forest. Emma nodded, her eyes wide and scared, but I don't even know where we are. I took out my phone more out of habit than hope, and the compass app was working, even though there was still no signal. At least the road we came in on was to the east, so I said if we head that way, we should hit it eventually. We had been walking for what seemed like hours when we heard the distant rumble of an engine. Hope flared through me because a car meant a road, and a road meant possible rescue, but as we got closer to the sound, hope turned to ash in my mouth. Through the trees, I could see a clearing, and in that clearing, I discovered a sight that chilled my blood. A group of men, at least a dozen in number, were gathered around several large trucks. Emma was tense next to me as they unloaded crates, their contents hidden but easy to guess given the circumstances. This was no amateur operation, it was well organized, professional, and extremely dangerous. Before we could move, a shout went out over there, and I saw something. We ran, but there was no attempt at stealth, and we crashed through the underbrush branches, tearing at our clothes and sending us sprawling with every step behind us. My legs were screaming in protest, and I could hear the sounds of pursuit, men shouting, branches breaking, and the occasional gunshot that sent splinters of wood flying from nearby trees. However, fear kept me moving, and I was driven forward by the fear of what would happen if we were caught. We burst out of the tree line onto a dirt road to our left, which vanished around a bend to our right, and about 100 yards away was a bridge that crossed a deep ravine. Emma gasped, "We can hide underneath it," if they thought it was risky. I helped Emma down the steep embankment, and then we slid and scrambled to the space beneath the bridge's deck. We pressed ourselves against the concrete support, trying to quiet our ragged breathing, and above us we could hear the thud of boots on the bridge and voices calling out to each other. If we looked there, we'd be trapped, but the only way out was to keep running, and I wasn't sure how much longer we could manage that. There were protests, but soon the voices died down and were replaced by the sound of engines starting up and driving away. We remained hidden for what seemed like hours, neither of us daring to speak. They couldn't have gotten very far. Check the woods on the other side. What if they went down to the river? My heart almost stopped at that last one, but then another authoritative and impatient voice cut through the chatter. "We don't have time for this. The buyer will be here any minute. If they ran, we'll deal with it later." When the forest had been silent for a while, I dared to whisper, "I think they're gone." Emma nodded, her face white and smeared with tears, and I hadn't noticed her crying. "What should we do now?" I took a deep breath and tried to think clearly, even though my mind was clouded by fear and exhaustion. "We follow the road," I said, "but we stay in the woods out of sight. Sooner or later it has to lead to a town or a highway. With no way to call for help, dangerous criminals were hunting us in the wilderness, and our survival would depend on our cunning, endurance, and good fortune." However, as I looked at Emma and saw the resolve in her eyes despite her fear, I felt a glimmer of hope that we were in this together and that somehow we would find a way out. We started down the road, staying just inside the tree line, and each step brought us closer to safety and farther away from the nightmare we had stumbled into. But I knew the real journey was just getting started, even if our peaceful weekend retreat had devolved into a struggle for survival, one that I was determined to win. And by the time the phone rung at precisely 3:17 a.m., we would have a story to tell, a story that some extremely dangerous people would prefer to keep silent. Its shrill tones sliced through my bedroom's silence like a knife, waking me up and making my heart race as I scrambled for the gadget on my nightstand. The screen displayed an unknown number, and for a second I thought about leaving it on voicemail, but something told me to do otherwise. Maybe, or just morbid curiosity made me say hello. I mumbled, my voice heavy with sleep, "I see you, Amanda." A low, gruff voice replied, "You really should invest in better curtains." I bolted upright, fully awake, and my eyes darted to the window where the curtains were drawn, but all of a sudden they felt as transparent as gauze. I could almost feel unseen eyes staring into me from the darkness outside. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying not to tremble. The voice laughed with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night, and I tossed and turned, jumping at every creak of the house, settling every rustle of leaves outside my window until my alarm finally went off at 7 a.m. I ended the call, my hand shaking as I put the phone down. I knew it had to be a prank, some sick joke played by a bored teenager or a disgruntled ex, but as I sat there in the dark, the silence now oppressive rather than peaceful, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that this was something more sinister. The events of the night seemed far away in the morning light, like a half-remembered nightmare. I went through my usual routine shower, coffee, and breakfast, trying to convince myself that it was nothing to worry about. By the time I left for work, I had nearly succeeded in pushing the unsettling call out of my mind. The day went by in a blur of meetings and deadlines, and the daily routine of office life was a welcome diversion, but I was exhausted and relieved to see the soft light of dawn peeking through the curtains. The memory of the call came flooding back as I was packing to leave. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and I thought, "Red looks good on you, Amanda, but I prefer the blue blouse you wore last Tuesday." My blood ran cold, and I looked down at my red sweater before frantically scanning the office. Most of my coworkers had already left for the day, and those who were still at their desks were preoccupied with their work, paying no attention to me, but someone was watching me. I practically ran to my car, clutching my keys securely. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number, and I felt like I was carrying a weapon in my hand. The drive home was a nerve-wracking affair, with every red light an eternity as I looked around the cars for anyone who might be following me. Once I got home, I double-checked all the locks, pulled the curtains tight, and collapsed onto my couch. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening, wondering who could be doing this, an ex-boyfriend, a disgruntled coworker, or something. The next few days passed in a fog of paranoia as I threw the phone across the room today, touching your lunch, and it landed on the carpet with a dull thud. How could they possibly know what I had or hadn't eaten? The calls and texts kept coming in, always from different numbers, and they always revealed some personal information about my day. They knew when I woke up, what I was wearing, who I spoke to, and even about the guilty pleasure romance novel I'd been reading in private. I changed my phone number, but it didn't help. To the police, but without making any specific threats, they said there wasn't much they could do because I was stuck in a waking nightmare where I was always looking over my shoulder and jumping at every strange noise. A week after the first call, I was in complete chaos, had hardly eaten or slept, and had called in sick to work because I couldn't bear the idea of being out in public where people might be watching. I sat in my living room with the curtains drawn and the lights off, staring at my silent phone, waiting for the next message, but it was different from the others. My first instinct was to ignore it and call the police to flee, but a part of me that was tired of being afraid and tired of not knowing made me think that maybe if I went, I could finally confront my tormentor and end this against my better judgment. I found myself walking through Riverside Park just before midnight, the moon full, casting long shadows across the path with every snapping sound and leaf rustle. I think it's time we met face to face, Amanda. Come here alone at midnight, or there will be consequences. Twig made me cringe as I got closer to the middle of the park and noticed a figure standing close to the fountain. Their features were hidden by a street lamp, and as I got closer, I recognized the gruff voice from that first phone call. "Hello, Amanda. I'm so glad you chose to join me." As they entered the light, I gasped. It wasn't who I expected, not some spooky stalker or resentful ex. It was Sarah, the quiet girl from my office, Sarah, with whom I'd hardly spoken other than a few courteous. The reason I was able to choke out Sarah's greetings was because it was so simple. You people go about your lives without realizing how exposed you are and how much of yourself you broadcast to the world. She took out a tablet and tapped at the screen. Your phone, computer, smart home devices, and Amanda's windows into your life are all windows that someone with the right skills could easily look through. As a result, I felt sick all this time. She had been using my own devices to spy on me, but why me? I asked, "What did I do to you?" and Sarah laughed in a hollow, unfunny voice. "You didn't do anything, you were just convenient. You were the ideal subject for my little experiment because you were both trusting and technologically naive." I repeated my voice, barely a whisper, to see how far I could go, and her eyes, shining with a man's light, showed me how much I could learn and how deeply I could infiltrate someone's life without them knowing. "Oh, Amanda, you did not disappoint. The things I've seen, the secrets I've learned," and she trailed off, shaking her head with a twisted sort of fondness, but as she spoke, she reached into her jacket. I saw the glint of metal and realized with horror that she was taking out a gun. Time seemed to slow down and I saw Sarah's finger moving towards the trigger and the gun's barrel pointing at my chest. At that moment, my survival instinct took over and I lunged. Sarah was caught off guard as we struggled for the gun, unseen except for our labored breathing. Suddenly, a loud bang reverberated through the park, and for a moment, I couldn't tell who had been hit. Sarah staggered backward, looking down at the red stain that was growing on her shirt, then back at me before she collapsed to the ground. I stood there with the gun heavy in my hand, my ears ringing from the shot, and I couldn't tell how long I was frozen. Before the distant siren's sound brought me back to reality, the aftermath was a haze of police statements and psychological assessments. Sarah barely survived and was arrested, revealing the full scope of her experiment to me and dozens of other victims whose lives were exposed by the technology they relied on. In the months that followed, I changed, I gave up my smart devices and developed a paranoia about my digital footprint. The carefree, trusting person I had been was replaced by someone who was constantly watching over her shoulder. The cardboard box was heavier than it appeared, and its contents were shifting ominously as I lifted it from the dusty shelf. I was constantly worried about who might be watching, but slowly, gradually, I started to heal and trust again, albeit cautiously, to reclaim my life. Now, as I sit here writing this, I do so as a warning. In this connected world we've built, privacy is an illusion and our lives are an open book to those who know how to read it. Cluttered maze of books, artifacts, and filing cabinets, but this box stood out. It was UN marked and sealed with thick packing tape that had turned yellow with age. As I placed it on the desk, I felt uneasy because I thought I might be uncovering something I wasn't supposed to see. My name is Liv, and I'm a graduate student, part-time house sitter, and now an unwitting detective in a mystery that seemingly began innocently enough when my thesis advisor, Professor Blackwood, asked me to house sit while he handed me the keys while grinning distractedly, saying, "I went to a conference in Europe. Just water the plants and pick up the mail." He hadn't mentioned that his office was more like a small library that had mated with an antique shop and then exploded. I had spent days organizing papers, cataloging books, and trying to bring some semblance of order to the chaos, so when I found the box, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the tape. Wasn't what I signed up for, so I should just put it back and act like I never saw it, but curiosity and that insistent, dangerous voice pushed me forward before I could stop myself. I took a letter opener from the desk and cut through the tape, and as I opened the flaps, I discovered a number of notebooks with worn covers, yellowed pages, photographs, news clippings, and what appeared to be official documents that were decades old. I picked up the topmost notebook, which had a leather cover. The notebook was soft and supple under my fingers, and when I opened it, I saw Professor Blackwood's familiar handwriting. However, the date at the top of the page made me stop. The professor would have been in his early 20s. As I started reading, the world around me vanished, the small office, the ticking clock, the faint sounds of traffic outside, as I was captivated by a story that seemed too fantastical to be true. The notebook described Professor Blackwood's first expedition as a young anthropologist, traveling to a remote following rumors of a lost tribe with extraordinary abilities in an Amazonian village. He discovered people who could heal wounds with a touch, communicate without speaking, and appear to know things they couldn't possibly know. At first, he had been skeptical and sought logical explanations, but as the evidence grew, he was forced to consider the impossibly possible. As I turned the pages, my heart was racing, and I saw photographs of people with strange markings on their skin that shone in the sunlight. As I read, the tone of the writing changed from excitement to fear. The last few entries were hurried, the handwriting almost frantic. Professor Blackwood wrote of being followed of strange accidents that seemed too coincidental, and the final page ended mid-sentence as if he'd been interrupted. In the dim jungle light, there were detailed sketches of plants I'd never seen before with notes on their supposed mystical properties and accounts of rituals that seemed to defy the laws of physics. As I combed through the other contents of the box, a darker picture emerged. I could see official-looking documents heavily redacted, but I could also make out phrases like subjects acquired and anomalous abilities. News clippings reported on the mysterious disappearance of an entire village in the Amazon, and there were photographs that were blurry out of focus but clearly showed figures that looked more like special effects than real. My hands were shaking. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of elaborate fiction, possibly research for a novel. As I pieced it all together, I felt a chill come over me. If this was true, if even a small portion of it was real, then Professor Blackwood had made a remarkable and dangerous discovery, the kind of discovery that powerful people might want to keep hidden. But why had he kept it all, and why had he left it in a place where someone like me could find it? The answer struck me with a sudden realization that he wanted it to be discovered. This wasn't carelessness, it was insurance that if something happened to him, the truth would come out as if on cue. My blood ran cold. When my phone buzzed and I received a text from an unknown number, I looked around frantically, half expecting to see someone watching me through the window. But the street outside was deserted. Just like a typical college town on a weekday afternoon. I should have listened, put everything back in the box, sealed it up, and pretended I hadn't seen it, but I couldn't because the mystery was too compelling and the implications were too great if what Professor Blackwood had found was as I worked. My mind raced. Who sent that text? How did they know what I'd found? And most importantly, what had happened to Professor Blackwood? Was his conference in Europe just a cover story? I started taking pictures of everything in the box, including the notebooks, documents, and photographs. I uploaded the pictures to a secure cloud storage as quickly as I could because I knew it could change everything we thought we knew about human potential with shaking hands. I was so focused on my task that I nearly missed the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps in the hallway that came to a stop just outside the office door. My heart leaped into my throat as I heard the jingle of keys, and I frantically shoved everything back into the box, not caring about the order. I had just managed to close the flaps when the door swung open, and two men in dark suits stood there, looking grim. It was obvious that they weren't Universal City Security. "Jacket, Miss Thompson," he said in a cool, professional voice. "We need you to come with us." I retreated, my thoughts racing with questions like, how did they know my name? And what did they want? But even as these questions ran through my head, I knew the answers. They were here for the box and the secrets it contained. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." But the man's expression remained the same. "Please don't make this difficult. We have some questions about your recent." We were only on the second floor, so I looked at the window to gauge my chances. If I could just move the man fast enough to block my path to the window, that would be foolish, Miss Thompson. We just wanted to talk, and we're not here to hurt you. But something in his eyes told me that talking was the last thing on their agenda. Whatever secrets Professor Blackwood had discovered, whatever secrets that box held, these men were here to make sure it remained buried in that moment. With a sudden rush of adrenaline, I decided that I couldn't let this end here and that I couldn't allow the truth to be silenced. I grabbed the box and threw it at the men, who were shocked, and I ran past them into the hallway. I ran like I had never run before, down the stairs, and out of the building. I heard shouts and the pounding of feet behind me, but I didn't turn around. I simply ran, my feet carrying me away from the campus and into the busy streets of the town. As I ducked into an alley to catch my breath, I realized that my life had just altered irrevocably. I was now a part of something greater than I could have ever dreamed, enmeshed in a mystery that spanned decades and continents. I no longer had the box, but I still had the pictures and the information, and I had to decide whether to try to forget what I had witnessed, return to my normal life, and act as though nothing had happened, or to delve deeper, follow the trail Professor Blackwood had left behind, and find the truth at all costs. As I heard sirens in the distance and saw a black car slowly cruising down, I knew what I was going to do. But this was only the beginning. The real adventure and the real danger were yet to come. After taking one last look at the university building where my normal life had come to an end, I turned and vanished into the maze of city streets, determined to see this through for Professor Blackwood, for the truth, and for the amazing secret that could change the world. The only sound breaking the eerie silence of the park was the rhythmic slap of my sneakers against the pavement. I thought it was just another late-night run, but as I turned the corner by the old fountain, I felt like someone was following me. My name is Jack, and I'm 32 years old, a software engineer, and until tonight, I was just another guy trying to keep in shape with his nightly jogs. I'd been running this same route through Oakwood Park for years, even after the city cut the budget for park maintenance, and the area began to look a little rundown. I had always enjoyed solitude and the challenge of navigating the dimly lit paths, but tonight was different. I had felt uneasy from the moment I walked into the park, as if someone was watching me. I initially dismissed it, blaming it on too much coffee and sleep deprivation, but as soon as I heard the distinct sound of footsteps behind me, I realized my intuition had been correct all along. I picked up my pace, my heart thumping in my chest, and the footsteps accelerated to match. I glanced over my shoulder, and about 50 yards back, I saw a dark figure approaching me. My mind was racing, listing all I knew about the park's layout. The main entrance was still a good mile away, but there was a side gate closer. If I could just make it there, I'd be out on a well-lit street with plenty of late-night businesses still open. I veered off the main path, cutting across a grassy field, in the direction of the side gate. The damp grass made for treacherous footing, and I almost lost my balance several times. The side gate appeared as I drew closer, a welcome sight in the darkness, but as I got closer, my heart sank because the gate was chained shut, a new padlock shining in the moonlight. When had they done that? In my moment of hesitation, I heard footsteps behind me grow louder, so I spun around, back against the gate, ready to face whoever was pursuing me. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, and I recognized him. It was a man I had seen loitering around the park entrance when he said, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk," in a surprisingly calm voice. I struggled to catch my breath as you chased me through a dark park. He held up his hands in a pleading gesture. "I know how this looks, but I had to make sure you were alone. It's not safe to be out here, you know, not with what's been happening." I started my run, average height and unremarkable clothes, but the intensity in his eyes had made me uneasy even then. The man looked around anxiously before bending closer. He said, "What are you talking about? There have been 3 disappearances in the past month, all of whom were last seen in or near this park. The police are keeping quiet, but something bad is happening here. I'd heard rumors of people going missing, of course, but nothing concrete, nothing in the news. How do you know about this?" I asked, still wary, but curiosity got the better of me because I saw it happen. His voice dropped to a whisper, "The last one, a woman. Running just like you. She was there one moment and then disappeared as if she had been engulfed by the shadows. I said, "That's not possible." But even as I was saying it, I wasn't sure. The man nodded grimly. "I know how it sounds, but I've been watching this place trying to figure out what's going on. And I think I'm close, which is why I had to warn you that you're not safe here." A part of me wanted to brush him off as a crackpot, rush home as quickly as I could, but there was a sincerity in his eyes, a sense of desperation that made me stop. And if I was being honest with myself, hadn't I noticed something strange about the park lately? A sense of being watched, even when I was by myself, a heaviness in the air. Okay, I said slowly, Leighton saying, "I believe you, what do we do about it?" A look of relief crossed his face as he said, "We need to find the source. I've narrowed it down to the old maintenance shed near the park center. Strange lights, strange noises. Something's happening there." I hesitated. Every instinct was the man introduced himself as Mike, a former park ranger who had been let go when the budget cuts hit. He kept an eye on the area even after losing his job because he couldn't get over his attachment to Ames. He was screaming at me to leave the park, go home, and forget this ever happened. But the idea of more people going missing and wondering what happened to their loved ones made me realize that I couldn't just walk away. "All right," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. We moved deeper into the park, staying in the shadows and moving as quietly as possible. As we got closer to the park center, I noticed things I had missed before, like odd markings on trees that weren't graffiti, patches of ground where nothing seemed to grow, and a strange humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Suddenly, the maintenance shed, a rundown building that appeared to have been abandoned for years, loomed before us. As we got closer, I could see a faint light coming from beneath the door Mike put there. He put a finger to his lips and motioned for me to follow him. As we slipped up to one of the dirty windows and peered inside, I was astounded by what I saw. The shed's interior had changed. Instead of the rusty tools and cobwebs I had anticipated, there was strange pulsing machinery in the middle, and there was a swirling vortex of light that looked like a tear in reality. There were also objects moving around it, shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly, shifting and changing in ways that were inexplicable. With the start, I reached into the vortex and pulled something out, and I realized it was someone unconscious or worse, but I couldn't tell. I staggered back, my head spinning, thinking that this couldn't be real, that it must be a hallucination or a trick of the light, but Mike's grim expression told me he was seeing the same thing, and he whispered urgently, "What's happening here? Whatever they're doing with those people, we can't let it continue." I nodded, but I felt a wave of fear wash over me, realizing that we were only two men against whatever. Mike reached into his jacket and took out a small device called an EMP. He explained that it should destroy whatever was powering that portal, but we would only have one chance at it. It was crazy, like two regular people facing a sci-fi horror film, but as I considered the missing jogger and all the other disappearances that might be related to this, I knew we had to try. We came up with a quick plan. Mike would create a distraction to draw the attention of the creatures I would sneak in, and plant the EMP as near the central machinery as possible. It was easy in theory, but in practice, everything happened in a flash. Mike threw open the door, screaming and waving his arms, and the creatures transformed into alien forms. I was surprised, and I squirmed in my hand, trembling as I armed the EMP. Just as I was ready to do so, one of the creatures spotted me and made a noise that was impossible to describe, a noise that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I watched it leap towards me impossibly fast, and I slammed the mic, grabbed my arm and yanked me towards the door, and we ran without daring to turn around as the shed was engulfed in a blinding light. The ground shook beneath our feet as the machine sparked and sputtered and the air filled with the smell of ozone. The vortex started to collapse in on itself, drawing everything nearby towards it. The creatures screeched, their forms twisting and distorting as they were sucked into the closing portal. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. The police searched the maintenance shed, but they found nothing other than evidence of a fire. The missing people started to reappear confused and disoriented, but otherwise unharmed. They had no memory of where they had been. I was certain that the entire park would be swallowed up, but then all of a sudden it was over and we were sprawled on the grass, gasping for air. The truth is that we may never fully understand what happened in Oakwood Park. All I know is that every time I put on my sneakers for my nightly runs, I'm not just exercising. I'm patrolling and watching for anything out of the ordinary, because I've come to terms with the fact that the world is more dangerous and strange than we can imagine. And that sometimes the only thing separating chaos from reality is a guy out for a jog and an ex-park ranger with the sharp pop of the tire exploding broke the quiet night and sent our car skidding across the empty highway. I struggled with the steering wheel, my knuckles white with effort, and we finally came to a stop on the gravel shoulder. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by our ragged breathing and the faint tick-tick-tick of the cooling system. Therefore, if you're ever out for a late-night run and you get that feeling of being watched, trust your instincts. We were in the middle of nowhere, miles from the last town we passed through, and who knew how far from the next. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape, and as I examined the shredded remnants of our tire, a sense of unease began to creep over me. "Engine, everyone okay?" I asked, looking at my wife Sarah in the passenger seat and our daughter Emily in the back. They nodded, shaken but unharmed. As I got back into the car, I told Sarah, "I'll change the tire, but we should probably wait until morning to try and find help." She nodded, her face pale in the dim light, and I knew what she meant. There was something off about this stretch of highway, something. There was no crickets chirping, no distant sounds of traffic, just an oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. I pulled out my phone knowing what I'd see. That made me anxious, but I ignored it and concentrated on the practical aspects of our situation. I told her, trying to sound more assured than I actually felt, that everything would be okay. "We have water and some snacks, so we'll just head out at first light." This familiar task helped to calm my nerves. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the immediate area around the car, but beyond that tiny circle of light, the night seemed to press in thick and impenetrable until I noticed a pair of headlights in the distance. Although I was relieved that another car might be able to help or at least give me hope as it drew closer, my relief quickly turned to anxiety because the car was moving too cautiously and slowly, and there was something strange about the headlights. They seemed too far apart and high off the ground for a typical car. The car stopped about 50 yards behind us, and I could just make out the outline of a large truck or van in the rearview mirror. Continued to be so intense that Sarah's voice was tight with fear. "What's going on?" I shook my head, trying to look calm for her and Emily's sake. "I'm sure someone was just stopping to help, so I'll go check it out." However, as I got out of the car, a chill went down my spine. The truck's engine had stopped, but no one had gotten out. Instead, it sat there with its headlights blazing like some predatory animal watching its prey. I took a few hesitant steps in its direction, waving amiably. "We could use some help if you have a moment." No, I was going to turn back to our car when I heard a door open and close, followed by footsteps on gravel, but I couldn't see anyone because the area between the headlights was still empty. I called out, sounding weak and thin in the vast emptiness surrounding us, and the footsteps continued to move slowly and deliberately in my direction, but no one was there. Panic struck, so I ran back to our car and practically dove into the driver's seat. "We must go now, Sarah's." The truck's headlights were swinging around, following us as we pulled away, and I saw the truck's headlights swing around following us. Emily's small voice came from the back seat, trembling with fear. "But it's okay, sweetheart," I lied, pushing our damaged car to its limits, "and we're just playing a game." My eyes were wide with fear, but the tire was already there when I cut her off and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered twice before roared to life. We were playing a little game of chase when the truck started to close in on us. Its enormous shape filled my rearview mirror, and the spare tire was causing the car to pull to one side. At that point, a new set of headlights appeared ahead of us, and another truck that was exactly like the one behind us blocked the road. I cursed under my breath, desperately searching for an escape route. There was a narrow dirt road that branched off from the highway, and I wrenched the steering wheel, sending us bumping and jolting down the unpaved track. As I realized with increasing horror that we were being hurt, trucks followed their powerful engines with ease over the rough terrain. We were being driven farther into this desolate wasteland, far from any help. The dirt road ended abruptly at the edge of a cliff, and I slammed on the brakes, causing our car to skid to a stop just feet from the drop. The trucks pulled up behind us, boxing us in John Sarah's voice, which was hardly more than a whisper. "What should we do?" I had no idea what to do. We were stuck with nowhere left to run, and the truck's headlights were turned off. A tap on my window made me jump, and when I turned around, I saw a face peering in at me, but it wasn't a face, it was smooth. At the same time, doors were opening, and I heard footsteps approaching our car from all sides. I knew that locking the doors was a futile gesture, but I doubted that it would stop the shapes moving in the darkness, barely visible in the dim moonlight. They were human-like, but something about their movements was off, too fluid and precise. I heard Sarah suppress a scream, and similar faces were pressed against each window, staring in at us with their eyeless gaze. One of the figures reached for the door handle, and I tensed, ready to fight, to do whatever it took to protect my family, but the door didn't open instead. A high-pitched whine filled the car, making my teeth hurt and my vision blurry. Sarah and Emily SL pumped in their seats, unconscious, and I struggled against I woke up with a start, sunlight streaming through the car windows, and we were parked on the side of the highway with our spare tire properly attached. Sarah and Emily were stirring next to me, looking as confused as I felt, and I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my mind. Encroaching darkness fought to stay awake, but it was a losing battle as my eyes closed. The last thing I saw was those blank faces watching impassively as we succumbed to whatever force they were exerting. We must have been more exhausted than I had anticipated, so we stopped to rest for a while, but even as I said that, I knew it wasn't true because the events of the night had come flooding back. And the chase of the cliff and those faceless figures had felt too real and vivid for a dream, but here we were, safe and sound, on the highway with no trucks, no mysterious dirt road, and no cliff. As we continued our journey as if nothing had happened, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that we had encountered something inexplicable. We drove on in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, but I knew that none of us would ever look at a deserted highway the same way again because we now knew what could be lurking out there in the darkness waiting for unwary travelers. As we passed a sign welcoming us to the next town, I silently vowed not to look at anything that had decided for whatever reason to let us go. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a truck appear on the horizon, but there was nothing there. Since not all of the things that go bump in the night are willing to just observe from the shadows, we would stick to the well-traveled routes and busy interstates going forward. No more night driving on rural lanes.